Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? What a day it is. Not the best time, right? Most of us are at home, social distancing. And human beings are not meant to be alone, right? We human beings are collective creatures by nature. All throughout human history, we have been working together to accomplish everything that mankind or humankind has ever accomplished. Right? Talk about hunter-gatherer civilization. That's the overwhelming majority of human history. We were hunter-gatherers in tribes, dependent on each other, working together, hunting and gathering our food. We have the rise of feudalism and capitalism. We have socialism emerging around the world, but these are all systems human beings built together. Human beings connecting with each other, putting their heads together, combining their intelligence and their labor, working together to put into practice a joint vision. Human beings are collective creatures by nature. So social distancing, staying home, the isolation that people feel, this is not a natural state of being for us. It's dangerous. It could lead to some kind of societal disintegration. Many people are desperate to break out of this state of mind, start connecting with people more, start being in groups, start cooperating, start feeling like they have something to wake up for, something to go to during the day. This is a hard time for all of us, a very, very hard time for all of us. So I want you to know, as this electronic voice coming to you over YouTube, a face on a screen, that you are not alone. We are still connected with each other. I am connected to you. You are connected to me. We're all connected with each other on this broadcast. We're a little community here. Let's face it, those of us who get together and have these chats every weekend and a little more frequently now that we're doing the whole social distancing thing, we are connected. We have a special bond. We have our little inside jokes about diet beverage and other things. We have plenty of things that connect us together. And these kinds of bonds, these kinds of connections are so, so important. It's so vital in times like these. Folks, if you have not hit the like button, if you have not hit the subscribe button, if you have not hit the notifications bell, now is the time to do it. Let's make sure that we're all connected here. Let's not leave anyone out of our growing special community that we have here on YouTube, on social media. There is so much we have to talk about. I've got an agenda to talk about. I'm sure folks have their super chats and their agenda to talk about. I'm excited to be here with you. You are not alone. There's no reason to be afraid. Well, there's plenty to be afraid of, sure, but we have each other. And for the next 2 hours, we can just enjoy each other's company. Enjoy this social distancing communication. Talk socialism, talk Marxism, talk world events, talk economy, talk history, talk whatever you want to talk about. I can answer your questions, and we can engage. We're here for each other. These are important times. I'm sure people have a lot on their mind, so why don't we talk? Let's talk, folks. Take a deep breath. Sit back, relax. Enjoy the ability to be here. And why don't we do that thing that we often do early on in the lives, where we do that little roll call. Let's see who's here. Let's see who's with us. I will call you out as I see you, and I will sip this orange juice as I do it. So, names and locations. Names and locations. Hey from the UK, Los Angeles, Lee County, North Carolina. Hello, comrades from Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, Australian here, Cleveland, Andy from Cleveland, Workingham, Shepherd, Indiana, Charlotte, North Carolina, Bendigo, Australia. Hello from Queens, New York, South Louisiana, Jack Dundee, UK, Amsterdam, Netherlands, Youngstown, Ohio. Hi from Mississippi. Hello from the UK. Dylan from Suffolk, New York, USA Jackrabbit, Kansas City, Missouri, Old Gringo. Talk more about USA democracy. Hello from Vallejo, California. Sydney, Australia, Las Vegas, Winnipeg, Manitoba, the Netherlands, San Diego, Winnipeg, Manitoba, hello from Norway, Florida, South Louisiana, another from South Louisiana, Connecticut, Poconos, Pennsylvania, New Orleans, Northern Italy, Saxony, East Germany, United Kingdom, Barnet, London, Missouri, yes, East Sussex, the United Kingdom, Brandenburg, East Germany, Memphis, Tennessee. Quite a community here, quite a community here. I see people are already asking about Kim Jong-un. Well, folks, we will know when we know. Washington State. We don't know yet. There's a lot of rumors floating around that are very contradictory. We'll know when we know. Long Beach. Yes, we are an international crowd. We are definitely international, Hugo Diaz. And we have a lot to discuss. Talk about CPI, and I will. We will know when we know about Kim Jong-un, and we're not gonna, until we know, right? I mean, there's a lot of people saying these rumors are unfounded. However, there's some other information. We will know when we know. We will know when we know. As folks are aware, I am building a think tank called the Center for Political Innovation. And we are hoping to build some kind of socialist community that will focus on education and, getting people to understand the nature of capitalism and the crisis. So there you go. That's what we are hoping to do. Information is below. I'm going to talk about it a little more later in the live, but thanks for asking. So why don't we just jump right into things? Why don't we just jump right into things? Get right into it. Super chats are appreciated. If you give me a super chat, I will write it down, and I will hopefully address it. Not hopefully, I will address it. Might not give you the answer you want, but I will give you an answer. So let's jump right into things. Folks, there is a novel written by Mary Shelley. It's considered to be the first work of science fiction ever published, called Frankenstein. Now, the story is that Mary Shelley and her husband, the poet Shelley, Percy Shelley, and some other people, they had a kind of a weekend getaway together. They decided to have a contest of who could write the best scary story. And Mary Shelley, for the contest, she wrote Frankenstein. And Frankenstein is timeless, right? It was a popular book. It was just a sensation. Flew off the shelves back in 1818. They made it into a movie in 1931 with Boris Karloff, the actor. They made numerous sequels and remakes. They've made Broadway musicals about it. They have done everything. It is a story that speaks to us. And it spoke more than ever to the time in which it was published. What is the story of Frankenstein? The story is that there is a scientist, a doctor, named Victor Frankenstein. And he is obsessed with the idea of creating life. He is going to create a person. So he goes around stealing body parts, digging up dead bodies, and putting together a human, a man. And of course, this man is much bigger and larger than other men, because in order to get all the surgery and get everything right, it has to be much physically larger than a normal person. And the way he's going to bring this person to life is with electricity, with lightning. So Victor Frankenstein, after stealing all the body parts, assembles this person, waits for a dark and stormy night, and with a lightning rod catches the electricity and brings this person, made of different dead body parts, to life, and creates a man. But this man that he has created is a monster. And it's ugly. And he pushes it away. And suddenly, all over the world, there are reports of this monster eating people, attacking people, killing people. And so, he is forced, Fabian Society, writing it down, he is forced to track it down, to try and stop the monstrous horrors of his creation. He chases it all the way to Antarctica, where he confronts the monster. And the monster says that because you did not give me affection and love, because you created me, you brought me into this world without giving me the kindness, the love that a person deserves, that is why I became this monstrous creature. And Mary Shelley, let's remember that her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, the author of the Declaration of the Rights of Woman, someone who was in awe of the French Revolution, that her husband was Percy Shelley, a very progressive and radical figure, and that one can interpret the Frankenstein novel as a critique of the modern world that was emerging back in 1818. With science and technology, humanity was doing things that had never been done before. Great technological and industrial breakthroughs were happening. The feudal commons were being ripped to pieces. Technology was advancing, human civilization was advancing, but at the same time, what did we have? We had millions of people who were left behind. In feudalism, you were either a landowner or a peasant, a serf. Everyone has a place. They're either, if they're not in the nobility, they have a place on the feudal commons. But not so in capitalism. In capitalism, people only have value if profit can be made from them. Corruption of U.S. democracy. People only have value if profits can be made from them. There's no natural place that everyone belongs. People are forced to sell themselves piecemeal, like a commodity, in order to get by. And as the Industrial Revolution took place, we saw millions of people suffering. We saw millions of people working in sweatshops. We saw people's lives being treated like they were just completely expendable. Capitalists working them to death to make profits. No concern for these people. We saw colonialism and imperialism, the colonization of different corners of the world, the exploitation of people, the making of people into slaves, into colonial slaves, exploiting them, murdering them, and killing them. And in this drive for progress that came out of the French Revolution, of the American Revolution, of the British Revolution, in these high ideals about the rights of man, life, liberty, and property, we were introducing a new social order where millions of people were left behind, where millions of people were forgotten, where we lost part of our humanity in the pursuit of profits. I think that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a very beautiful, beautiful work of literature. And I don't view it as reactionary. Many people view it as simply a right-wing, don't play God, anti-science text. I don't see it that way. I see it as a warning that science and human progress and technology should be aimed at serving all the people, and that we cannot allow anyone to be left behind, to be abandoned, to be neglected, to be forgotten. We should make sure that there's a place for all people in our society, and that if we engage in great scientific progress, in inventing and advancing the means of production, in increasing technology, we must do it in a way that makes sure we maximize the happiness and the potential for all the people. And that when you have a system where profits come before people and people's basic needs are disregarded, this is going to lead to a monstrosity. This is going to lead to untold horrors that we cannot control. This is going to lead to great social explosions. Sure, Mary Shelley wasn't a Marxist. I mean, she wrote the book about the same year Karl Marx was born. But she saw in the emerging society that was created in Western Europe, France, Britain, Germany, the potential for a great explosion, because these millions of people that have been left out, that have been forgotten, that have been pushed aside, eventually they would come together. They would join forces. And they would seize the banks, factories, and industries from the capitalists. They would organize society to serve the people. And that's what Karl Marx said in 1848 when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. Right? When the workers are left outcast and starving amid the wonders that they have made. That's from Solidarity Forever, the old Marxist anthem. When workers are left outcast and starving amid the wonders they have made, it's only a matter of time before they seize those wonders for themselves, before they take control of the economy and organize it to serve public good and not profits. And that if human progress is to continue, the creativity, the brilliance, the innovation of the human spirit must be harnessed in order to function in a rational way, and not simply to feed the profits of a small group of owners and to feed the anarchy of production. That only with socialism and rational control of the means of production can society get out of the rut created by profits in command. Frankenstein, I view it as a progressive book. That is not the traditional Marxist interpretation, but that's how I see it. I think it's a very, very important text. And I think that in this time, when in the aftermath of the coronavirus shutdown, we have millions of people who are worried about where their next meal is going to come from, worried about their job, worried about paying their rent and paying their bills, and feeling like they have just been completely forgotten, completely left behind, wondering who is going to care for me, who is going to make sure I have what I need, who is going to make sure I have a place in this society. The message of Frankenstein rings louder than ever before. Millions of people are feeling this huge anxiety, are feeling this fear. What am I going to do? I've worked hard. I had a job. I took care of my family. I did everything I was supposed to do. And all of a sudden, this pandemic came along. I didn't cause the pandemic. I didn't create this pandemic. And society is in chaos. What are we going to do? How am I going to get by? What are we going to do? And we have a government that is falling on its face here in the United States, completely falling on its face, completely in dereliction of duty, completely inadequate in its response to this crisis. Folks, we are living in very, very exciting times. So, let's talk about the super chats, shall we? I have the Fabian Society, right? The Fabian Society was a group of intellectuals. They were close to the British Labour Party. They were in it. They were not Marxist. They were more reformist, socialists. They were named after a Roman general. And a lot of big thinkers in British society were among the Fabians. George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, who I saw someone else ask me about. It was a trend of British social democracy. And it was a lot of very, very wealthy people, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. And sometimes they praised the Soviet Union, and sometimes they did not. They were more of a reformist social democratic current. But during the 1930s, they had to acknowledge the economic achievements that the Soviet Union was carrying out with its 5-year plans. It was an interesting current, and it was very influential among art and literature in Britain. Um, Corruption of U.S. democracy. Well, that's interesting. What does corruption mean? If I have a corrupt file on my computer, that is a file that is not operating in the way it is intended to operate. And corruption, the way we understand it, is that the government is meant to be honest and to just do what is in the public interest. And when we catch politicians taking bribes or making backroom deals, that's corruption. That's the system not working the way it's supposed to work. And so we jail people for it, right? Well, here's the thing, folks. We all know that that's not the way the system is supposed to work, right? The rich and powerful assert their will in the United States and have from the beginning, right? The people of the United States have democratic ideals and democratic aspirations, but there has always been a rule of the United States by big money, right? Always has been. The founding fathers of the United States were the wealthiest plantation owners and business owners and capitalists. That's just how it's been, that there has been a, if you want to call it, corruption of U.S. democracy by the rich. And these anti-corruption campaigns that have been waged, interestingly, often serve to solidify the corruption of the richest of the rich and suppress opposition. For example, I'll give an example. In 1979, you had abscam. Have folks ever heard of abscam? It was short for Arab scam. And the FBI got an FBI informer, and they dressed him in a chic, Middle Eastern chic outfit. And they sent him to New Jersey to go and meet with a number of elected officials. And with a hidden camera, this Middle Eastern sheik, who was not really a Middle Eastern sheik, would try to offer these politicians money. And Abscam accompanied a similar operation they called BriLab, which stood for bribe labor. And on the surface of it, it sounds good, right? We shouldn't have politicians taking bribes, right? But the reality was that these politicians that were being targeted by the FBI's Abscam and BriLab were populists, right? You talk about Harrison Pete Williams, who was in New Jersey. He was a U.S. senator. These were folks that were associated with labor unions. These were old Roosevelt Democrats. They were Italian, they were Irish, they were Roman Catholic, they were based in urban areas, they were tied to the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, to the International Longshore Association. They were union guys, and they were not going to go along with Jimmy Carter and Paul Volcker and some of the policies that were coming out that were resulting in mass unemployment. The Carter administration was a new left administration. It was not old left. It was not Roosevelty. And they went after, and it was pretty blatant that they got, for example, this Senator Pete Williams, he refused the money. On the tape, when the Middle Eastern sheik tried to give him a suitcase of money, he pushed it back. He pushed it away. But it didn't matter. The media went out there, we've caught him being corrupt. And at the trial, the prosecution argued that just meeting with this Middle Eastern sheik was, proof that he was susceptible to corruption. He went to prison, right? Yes, this has been fictionalized in the movie American Hustle, but I'm telling you how it actually went down. This was a purge within the Democratic Party of the labor faction, of the urban wing of the Democratic Party that was tied to organized labor and wasn't going to go along with the austerity that Paul Volcker was unleashing, right? You'll remember Jimmy Carter appointed Paul Volcker to be the head of the Federal Reserve. And when Paul Volcker was running the Federal Reserve, he raised interest rates astronomically. And that was illegal around the country in most states. So, as Jimmy Carter was leaving office, they passed the Monetary Control Act of 1980, which was a law that basically, overruled all states' local laws regulating the lending of money. What we now call predatory lending, right? Where we talk about, these mortgage ripoff schemes, the housing bubble, all of that. All of that started with Jimmy Carter. All that started with Jimmy Carter and Paul Volcker. And there was a faction in the Democratic Party of tough union guys who were not going to take it. And so they had abscam to get rid of them. And it was horrendous. Abscam was horrendous. And they did similar things to black elected officials. You notice they're always going after some prominent black elected official in the United States. Always. They've got some kind of corruption charge or something. And if you look at it, in a lot of cases, it's a scam. It's entrapment. It's a setup, right? They went after Adam Clayton Powell, a very prominent African-American member of Congress from Harlem. They went after him. They've gone after politicians in Chicago from the African-American community. And this anti-corruption campaigns, it's very similar to what's being done internationally. The way they jailed Lula da Silva. Folks will remember how Lula da Silva, the former president of Brazil, was imprisoned. And then it was released. We have now proof that the judge and the prosecutor were in cahoots. Their texts have been published. Lula da Silva was railroaded to jail. But why did they railroad Lula da Silva to jail? Why? Because they didn't want him to run in the election. He would have beaten Bolsonaro, the Trump-supporting populist free market demagogue who's not really a populist. He would have beaten Bolsonaro, the guy who's tied to right-wing paramilitaries, the offensive conservative in Brazil. They would have beaten him. Lula da Silva was associated with good economic times, with socialism, with populism. And according to every poll, Lula da Silva would have won the election if he had been allowed to run. But with the Panama Papers, something very closely tied to USAID, to the George Soros Open Society Institute, with the Panama Papers, they opened the door and they were able to imprison Lula da Silva on some corruption charges to make sure that the really corrupt people and the really corrupt global order was not tampered with. Similar to what's being done at this point to Isabel dos Santos, a leader of the MPLA in Angola, who presided over huge amounts of economic growth and expansion. When the oil prices were high, she arranged for some of the greatest economic growth in Angola's history. And similar moves have been taken against her. A lot of times these anti-corruption narratives sound good on paper, but in reality, they're about keeping the most corrupt people in power. Christina Kirchner also suffered, right? That this is a scam. When American intelligence, when the CIA, when the Western capitalist powers want to go after somebody, they've learned that going after them by saying, they're a commie, that doesn't work so much. And going after them and saying, he's a dictator, that doesn't work so much even. That's what they've tried to run on the Bolivarians. So now, folks, they've decided to go after corruption, as if the World Bank and the IMF and the free market institutions and George Soros, as if they are not corrupt. Oh no, they're not corrupt. Right? Paul Volcker and the Carter administration, the folks that carried out abscam, where did they get their training? They were all, they all were railroaded into the White House by something called the Trilateral Commission. Read about the Trilateral Commission. This was a Rockefeller operation. And read some of the writings of the Trilateral Commission about the dangers of democracy, the dangers of popular power, the problems with having ordinary people involved in politics, right? Neoliberalism, the economic theories of Ayn Rand, of Milton Friedman, Alan Greenspan, These ideas were developed, not accidentally. They were created for the purpose of maximizing the profits of the rich and rolling back living standards around the world. And it was Republicans who were the most enthusiastic supporters of economic neoliberalism, but many Democrats went along with it. And part of going along with it, part of developing neoliberalism, was eroding leftist politics, changing leftist politics, completely reinventing socialism and Marxism and political left-wing ideas in order to make them pessimistic, in order to make them hopeless. And I'm writing about that. You know about the Synthetic Left book I'm working on. I'm going to write a whole book on how the forces who brought us neoliberalism drastically worked to completely change left-wing politics to further their agenda. And I'm working on a book on it, and I'm sure you're all going to love it. I know you're all very, very excited about it. And I'm building the Center for Political Innovation, the CPI, for the purpose of restoring left-wing politics. I want to rebuild the city-building tendency that I speak about in my book. I want to create an optimistic and constructive socialism that aims to empower working people, populism, socialism, working class power. That's what I believe in. And these ideas have been buried by the Rockefellers. They've been buried by the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom. They've been buried by all kinds of middle-class deviations, petty bourgeois nonsense, eco-Malthusianism. And I see my purpose as trying to restore the politics that once made socialism strong, the politics of Gus Hall, the politics of Eugene Debs, the politics of William Z. Foster, the politics of Huey Newton, the politics of Paul Robeson, the politics of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. These are the politics that have been attacked, of course, from the right, from anti-communists, from free market extremists, and from the synthetic left. The folks who don't believe in historical progress, the folks who favor chaos, the folks who oppose populism, the folks who don't want to build workers' power. And I am dedicated to reviving populism, socialism, and the real principles of the real constructive left. That's what I'm about. And I haven't given up. This pandemic has not stopped me. We're going to have a conference, and we're going to build the Center for Political Innovation. You can be absolutely sure of that. Obviously, we couldn't have it on April 18th, but we will be having a founding conference. And if you want to help us out, donate. Please go click the link below, go to the donate page, and help us get the funds together to build the Center for Political Innovation. Hey, Caleb, what are your thoughts on Jacobin's pro-Zionist donation diet beverage gang? And I still have to talk about H.G. Wells, but let's talk about Jacobin. You know, so it's been revealed that Jacobin receives money from a foundation called the Jewish Communal Fund. Now, the Jewish Communal Fund is a donation primary funder of something called called J Street. I don't know if people are familiar with J Street, but J Street is a pro-Israel group that is critical of Israel. Most pro-Israel groups, blindly defend Israel, accuse anyone who disagrees with Israel or its policies of being anti-Semitic. J Street is a little bit different. J Street, they will protest against, if Israel does something that's causing outrage against the world. They will talk about Palestinian human rights, but they're pro-Israel. They're the more moderate wing of the Israel lobby, and they're not anti-Israel. And they will tell you the J Street folks are definitely not anti-Israel, not anti-Zionist. It's the moderate wing of the Israel lobby. They also fund something called Israel on Campus, which is a group that promotes Israel on American college campuses. And now we understand that they have been cutting a check for hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund Jacobin, the socialist magazine. Well, folks, I know a lot of great people who read Jacobin, and they publish some great stuff. Not everything they publish is bad, but, am I surprised by this revelation? Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. They have dropped the ball on a lot of international issues. They've written awful things about Venezuela. They've written awful things on Syria. And And they seem to have this. I mean, if you read what they talk about socialism, socialism means, a bunch of workers start a cooperative business, or, the anti-Stalinism, they're, it's a Trotskyite, it's a well-funded Trotskyite operation. And there you go. I mean, but folks, we should at the same time acknowledge that there's a lot of very good people who maybe they've never read anything socialist, and the first thing they come across is Jacobin. And they deserve some credit. I mean, if they're promoting socialism. So it's you want to be careful. But at the same time, I am deeply disappointed by a lot of Jacobin's content. A lot of it makes me very angry. I see the headlines, very anti-China, very, very confused. But they were good on Bolivia. They did defend Evo Morales, and that was decent. And they've written a lot about workers' rights here in the United States. It's a mixed bag. But this revelation about who's funding them shouldn't be deeply surprising. And, the way their folks have always treated me, they're terrified, I'll tell you, of anyone who's really anti-imperialist. I mean, they run away like you wouldn't believe. They are very, very afraid of anyone who has genuine politics. And, again, things get created because there's a fear that something else might emerge to replace them, right? It's better to have this than have that, right? But even that in and of itself, right? Martin Luther King was an amazing activist. But everyone knows you couldn't have had Martin Luther King without Malcolm X. That the reason that the population, many people in the ruling class of the United States, were willing to cooperate with Martin Luther King was because they were terrified of Malcolm X. And sometimes we have the establishment putting out figures that are a little more moderate because they see the danger to them from forces that are more radical. It's more complicated. And that it's very tempting to get sectarian, to just be like, F you, you're a fake socialist, you're not a real socialist, I am. That tone is not very winning. It's not a very winning tone. Now, who are your initial funding target? You. Yes, you. People like you. I don't know of any big corporations that are going to be giving me money to establish it. And there's a lot of people that are really dedicated to building the CPI. I mean, I've met some amazing people out in California, out in Arizona. There's a lot of people who are really dedicated to this. But ultimately, we're only going to be able to do this with the money that we put together ourselves, right? I really doubt that the Ford Foundation is just going to cut us a check. So if you want to support it, please go ahead. Now, before I forget, H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells was a novelist, a science fiction novelist, and a well-known British intellectual. I actually read some of his short stories when I was in junior high and enjoyed them. H.G. Wells, he was a progressive. He was for workers' rights. He was a member of the Fabian Society. He wasn't a Marxist, and he did have kind of an anti-communist vibe. But he did a very interesting interview with Stalin in 1932. Very, very interesting interview. And I encourage people to read that interview, H.G. Wells' interview with Stalin, because he gets Stalin to talk. And they have a back and forth that's very, very interesting. Stalin talks about how he is different than Roosevelt. Stalin talks about how the Soviet Union is different than fascists. It's a very fascinating interview. The interview that Stalin did with H.G. Wells is really, really worth studying. And, I will say, The Time Machine, which is one of H.G. Wells' most well-known science fiction novels. First of all, it was groundbreaking. How many movies and sci-fi books do we have that have the theme of time travel? Well, the first person to, start talking about time travel was H.G. Wells with his Time Machine. But the Time Machine, interestingly, is also a social commentary. So H.G. Wells, the Time Machine guy, I forget what his name is, the character who makes the Time Machine, he goes into the future. And in the future, it's weird. There's these really nice people who are just kind of silly and nice and relaxed and just walk around and are just kind of spacey, who live above ground. And then there are these big, mean, scary people that have technology who live below the ground. And what H.G. Wells was trying to illustrate is basically he was arguing in his sci-fi universe the industrial working class and the bourgeoisie evolving into separate species. That's what he was getting at, right? And the working class were the Morlocks, the people who live below the ground and have machines and technology, and they're below the ground and they're scary and mean and all of that. And the ruling class are these kind of like weird elf people that are just kind of spacey, and it's kind of an interesting analogy. It was about the Industrial Revolution. He saw two classes emerging in society, the factory owners and the factory workers. And he was applying what was very new at that point, Darwin's theory of evolution, and applying it to people. And he argued that eventually, if this trend continued, we would have two separate species. He didn't actually think that, but that was the premise of the time machine. And it's brilliant. And I was actually very disappointed. Couple decades ago, they made a movie, The Time Machine. And I went to see it, and it just missed this theme entirely. But that's the premise of the book, is that, he's trapped in this world and this future society where the human race has evolved into two separate species, the bourgeoisie and the working class. And the bourgeoisie are these people who live above ground and are kind of midgets and are just kind of spacey and live in terror of these working class people that are vulgar monsters that live below the earth and have fire. And that's what the book is about. It's kind of amusing. That's H.G. Wells. But yeah, folks, Jacobin magazine, I'm not surprised. Can you talk about overpopulation and Malthusianism? What's your point of view? It's interesting. If you want to know the Marxist critique of Malthusianism, you should read Theories of Surplus Value by Karl Marx, right? This is a compilation of Marx's economic texts that was assembled after his death. He starts out by talking about Adam Smith, he talks about Ricardo, and he talks about Robert Malthus, or Thomas Robert Malthus, the British economist. And in it, Marx rips him to shreds. He shows that the economic basis of his concept of overpopulation, right? Malthusianism, it's this theory that the society's population outstrips the food supply. Our ability to grow food and create food doesn't grow as fast as the population does. So obviously we have to have all these big wars and all of this because it leads to all these social unrest problems. That's what he was premising. And Karl Marx exposes him. He just exposes him, completely exposes him as a shill. That the concept of overpopulation, that first big book that Malthus wrote, was nothing but a bourgeois attempt to explain away the French Revolution. That's all it was, right? The French Revolution was happening. And he wanted to explain why it was happening, so he wrote this piece. And later, Malthus wrote economic texts justifying the predatory behavior of landlords and renters, right? And that throughout his career, Karl Marx exposes him beautifully in Theories of Surplus Value as just a shill, an economic writer hitman. He wrote what was convenient, what the ruling class of Britain wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that the French Revolution was bad. Oh, well, the population outstripped the food supply, and but Malthusianism in general, right? You talk about neo-Malthusianism. What was popular in like the early 1900s and still quite popular among the ruling class of the United States and of Britain. This idea there are just too many people in the world and we need to drastically reduce the population. Useless eaters, which was a term that comes from Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, they started referring to disabled people as useless eaters and exterminating them. There's a famous poster of this disabled man. It says, "This man cost the taxpayers this much money." This is Nazi kind of stuff. And neo-Malthusianism was very popular with Rockefellers, the descendants, with John D. Rockefeller himself, with the descendants of them. And it's interesting because Margaret Sanger, she pushed birth control. She was a socialist. She was a big supporter of the IWW and the Socialist Party in New York City, but she fled to Britain, and she eventually got hired by the Rockefellers to push, birth control, not because she believed in women's rights. She believed in women's rights, but the people pushing it, the people paying for her birth control clinics were all about overpopulation. And Margaret Sanger went from socialism to basically become a racist. She wrote a book arguing that birth control would eliminate, inferior, quote unquote, inferior races, right? She was awful. She spoke at Ku Klux Klan meetings. But it was because, she was in socialism for sex. She was a wealthy woman, Irish heritage, New York City, very wealthy. And, she was into socialism because she'd heard those socialists were a bunch of, they believed in free love and all of that. When the Soviet Union didn't have free love, it had a traditional family, well, that was it. She wasn't interested in socialism anymore, right? And there's elements like that. I mean, I'm sure you've met people that are socially liberal. Um, Communism in Laos. Wow. Talk about the history of communism in Laos, right? Well, Laos is a very small country, the Lao People's Republic, it's called. Very small country, and it worked with the people of Vietnam to fight for their independence and freedom. Um, and it's very small, and it does at this point, it works closely with Vietnam, it works closely with China as well. It's a very small country, and they're struggling. And when you have a very small country like that, and what's interesting is that it is an ethnic minority, and the communists in Vietnam, the communists in China, made sure that they had the right to have their own sovereign country, and that was something that was important, right? There were some people who may have argued, well, this is just part of Vietnam, this is just part of China, but no, there was a feeling that this group, this nation, with their common culture and their common heritage, they have the right to have a separate territory. Um, yeah, I mean, I know in my town, it's quite interesting. The town I grew up in, there were a number of families from Laos, because every church in my town had sponsored a family to flee from there. So a lot of anti-communist families from Laos had moved to my little town. That's quite of interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's a country that's struggling, but it's worked with China on the Belt and Road Initiative. It has friendly relations with Vietnam. It's an independent country. How much money are you trying to raise for the CPI, and what are your expenses? I'm not going to get into that on here, folks, because right now I can't put a budget out in front of you because we were about to have a big conference and then the pandemic happened. We don't even have a date for this new conference. So, we had an expense sheet. I had an amount that we needed, and now we're in a situation where we don't know what's going to happen. As soon as restrictions start getting lifted, I mean, I've already spoken to the hotel where we were going to have our conference. They've agreed to let our down payment work for a new date. We will then have to schedule a new date. We'll have to figure about the transportation for the speakers, which is going to be a very big expense. We're going to have to figure out a lot of things. But yes, and we have some money. We raised a significant amount of money, so we have money. But we could always use more, and we are hoping to have a West Coast conference as well. The idea was we would have our East Coast conference in April to launch it. Then in the fall, we'd have our West Coast conference. Well, now things are up in the air. So we're going to have to regroup and figure out what we're going to do. But overall, we want to have a nice conference, right? I mean, professional camera crew, great camera crew, and I gave them a down payment too, and they're willing to do it at a future date, even though we can't do it on the actual date. They're going to do it for a decent sum of money. We're going to have a great video to come out of the conference, but it's important that we have people there. It's important that we have people in the room. There's going to be music there, speeches, audience participation. We want it to just be a day of just kind of bringing people together and building that feeling that we're part of something and we're building something. And we want to take that opportunity to just build a community. I will say Airbnb ripped me off, right? Because I had reserved an Airbnb for some of the people coming in from out of town. They completely ripped me off, right? I said, hey, people aren't coming from out of town because of COVID-19, and they still ripped me off. I ended up, losing a couple $100 from Airbnb, and I'm furious about that. I fought for it, I appealed it, but Airbnb completely ripped me off. But so far, everyone else has been cooperative. I think it's going to be a great conference still. It's just everything's on hold. I know that a lot of you are going to be there, and I was so excited to meet so many of you, right? A lot of you are in different parts of the country, right? I do little classes in New York City. They're almost always full. Like I did a class in December called Mao and the American Socialists, and it was great. It was tremendous. It was a tremendous event, standing room only, but that was just New York City people. Now, we want to have something. We want to have something that we do that please comment on the 1936 NYE committee report on the munitions industry, including its findings on Wall Street's role. I'm sorry, I'm I mean, I think you're getting at Smedley Butler, right? Smedley Butler and his talk about munitions and war is a racket. I think that's what you're getting at, but I'm sorry, I don't go around memorizing reports from the 1930s. I wish I had more specific information. Perhaps you can post some information about that in the chat. I think that's interesting. But yeah, Smedley Butler, who was a Marine Corps general in the 1930s, he quit his job, and he very famously, he wrote a very, very good book called War is a Racket, exposing war profiteering, how corporations enrich themselves from war. And Smedley Butler also exposed the plot for a military coup against Roosevelt. So Smedley Butler is a great figure. I mean, he's a socialist, a progressive, very important figure for the anti-war movement. So I'm a fan of Smedley Butler, absolutely. And I think that what you're getting at with this munitions report and Wall Street, I think that's probably what you're getting at, but I don't know for sure. So there you go. Um, but folks that are now joining us, please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please make sure you're getting the notifications. Most of you are probably here because you got a notification. So make sure that you're getting the notifications. We want to have as many people here as possible. I'm researching mutual aid networks, looking to find a local one or establish one. I want to connect with one. Thoughts? Yes, we need mutual aid more than ever. I had a great interview earlier with a young man from the Communist Party, Sean Rosellis, and he is doing great work providing mutual aid out in Orange County, California. Um, and my hope is that, that other people will do the same thing. And I know that there's a good guy, Joe the Red, who's on a lot of these lives, good friend of mine. And he is doing that kind of work in the Democratic Socialists of America. He's helping people out. And there are other groups that are doing a lot of aid to try and help people. And I encourage that. And let me add, I don't see the Center for Political Innovation as competing with those groups. I'm not trying to build a new party. I'm trying to build a think tank that will give expression to this ideology and fight to roll back the synthetic left and push real Marxism and build community. Have powerful events with music, with speeches that bring people together, publish great books, put on great forums, build kind of a network of people that are dedicated to these ideas. But I don't see it as sectarian, as competition. There are people that I work with in different groups, people that used to be in the Socialist Party or are still in the Socialist Party, people that are in the Communist Party, people that are in different groups, and anyone's welcome. No one's going to turn you away because you're part of one of these groups. I was in a group for a long time, and a lot of these groups, I will say, they aren't really going any place, but I'm not here to compete with them. I'm building a think tank that will facilitate socialist discussion and build community. That's what I want to do. I want to build community. I want to build a place where people can feel like they belong, where we can espouse our ideas and promote real socialism and combat the pessimism and the lies and the hopelessness put out by the synthetic left. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to build a community more than anything. And so in the form of a think tank, I am developing the Center for Political Innovation. And I really, really hope that all of you can be part of it, and you can be once we have a date for our new launch conference, I hope that you all can be there. I really, really do, because we need this. It's interesting. If you read Edgar Snow, right? Edgar Snow was the first journalist to ever interview Mao Zedong. He went to the Red Army camp in China. And it was interesting because in the newspapers, Chiang Kai-shek, they simply referred to it as the Red Bandit Army. And they never really talked about having political goals. But there were a lot of rumors about Mao Zedong, this guy named Mao, and the Red Bandit Army. Well, Edgar Snow actually went and visited the camp. And he talked about this headquarters of the People's Liberation Army that he visited. And how one thing about it was people were always singing. Right, that songs were just a huge part of what they did at the People's Liberation Army camp, is they were constantly singing. And they had rewritten every traditional Chinese folk song with communist lyrics, right? Kind of like what Joe Hill used to do in the United States. Joe Hill would rewrite American songs to be communist. Well, that's what Mao did. And in the camps, in these Red Army camps, they'd be singing all the time. They'd be training, they'd be farming, they'd be working, and they would sing. There's some great songs. I mean, I don't speak a word of Chinese, and I would butcher it if I tried it in Chinese, but it's like, there's that song, without communists, there be no new China. Without communists, there be no new China. There was that song, right? There's a lot of great songs that came out. And that was what, if you looked at the Red Army, they were always singing, right? And they developed this socialist culture. I'm not a musician, but one thing that has been my pet peeve about leftist meetings is so many leftist meetings, it's just boring speeches. Boring speeches, right? You need to have music. You need to have music, absolutely. Another thing that I thought was beautiful about the Red Army camps, if you read about them in Edgar Snow's beautiful book Red Star Over China, one of the beautiful things about it is that when Edgar Snow is interviewing Mao about his life, Mao's wife is in the room. She's in the cave. I shouldn't say the room because it's a cave. Mao lives in a cave. And she's never heard any of it before because they had a rule in the Red Army camp that once you joined the Communist Party, you got a new name and you didn't talk about your old life. They didn't want people to be homesick. They didn't want people to feel like they were, and so they didn't want people to be treated differently because of their class background. So people just reinvented themselves. I think that's fascinating, right? And that it was very much, and you talk about Mao was very much inspired, by the Taiping Uprising that had happened, right? The Heavenly Kingdom or whatever. That there was a peasant revolt in China in the late 1800s that took on aspects of it. And when Mao built the Red Army, the People's Liberation Army, the Eighth Route Army, when he built that organization, when he built the Communist Party in the countryside, when it was growing by leaps and bounds and seizing liberated territory, it was very much something suited to the culture of China at that time. And there were a lot of, the traditional family structure in China. You had a lot of teenagers who had a lot of resentment. You had the peasants that were angry at the landlords. And he figured out how to appeal to people and how to build this group of people that were reborn to fight for a whole new China, to build a new China. And that new China is there. We can see the new China that Mao built with our very eyes. It's the second largest economy in the world. No country has ever come so far. No country has ever come so far. What Mao started in the mountains with his little red bandit army, or that's what Chiang Kai-shek called it, the People's Liberation Army, it's playing out before our eyes. It's funny, Zhou Enlai, who was the foreign minister of the People's Republic of China, he very famously said, they asked him, what do you think of the French Revolution? This was in the 70s. They asked him, what do you think of the French Revolution? He said, I think it's too soon to tell. And people laugh about that, but there's an element of truth in that. You never know what the impact will be. You never know what the impact will be of your actions. And a lot of times it takes a long time for things to play out. On a lot of lives, I'm not going to do it again, but I've talked about how the year of 1999 was very pivotal in my life, was very pivotal in what's going on in the world today. But it took a long time for the stuff that got started in 1999 to have the big impact that it has, right? That it takes a long time, right? It takes a long time for an acorn to become an oak tree. It takes a long time. And that sometimes the results of your actions, you can be working really, really hard and not see any results. And then all of a sudden the results come down dramatically. All of a sudden there are results that you never even anticipated. Right? That's how the world is, right? It's not always a steady advance. Not always a steady advance. When you have a conversation with somebody, and this is very true, you may be somewhere in your life where you're arguing with people about communism at your workplace, you're arguing with your family members about communism, and they tell you, you are full of shit, communism has failed everywhere it's ever been tried, socialism has never done anything, you are full of it, capitalism is the greatest system, and they just argue with you, but then years later, coronavirus, the economy collapses, and they go, oh shit, Bob was right. The capitalists are just greedy. They don't care about us. Bob was right. We need the economy to be organized to serve public good. Joe, I mean, he was telling me that 5 years ago, and I told him he was full of garbage. I didn't listen to him, but he was right. He was right. Sometimes people can't hear you in the moment. They can't hear you in the moment. And it takes them years to hear your words, but your words are echoing in their ears, echoing louder than ever, decades later. At the time they told you to F off, go screw yourself, I would never, never agree with you, but the words you said echo in their ears. Have you read the book The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists by Tressel? I have not read the book The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists by Tressel. I'm sorry. I do thank you for asking me about it with a super chat, but I have not read that book. I have not read that book. I know nothing about it. But yes, folks, I'm doing a lot of research. And this is DC Hyslop, and he's telling us that this was something about war profiteering and munitions industries supporting World War I. Folks, Caleb, please have a conversation with Ben, BTC Socialist, or the Blockchain Socialist. They have a clear vision on how to effectively change blockchain technology to affect leftist goals. Sure, I'll have a conversation with that fella. Yeah, connect me, right? My door is open. Send me an email, Twitter message, Facebook, whatever. I'd be happy to talk to it. A lot of people are asking me, why don't you go on this show? Why don't you go on that show? I'll do it. No problem. I mean, there's the amount of people that have reached out to me in the last few days about wanting me to interview them or wanting me to be interviewed by them or whatever. I know on April 30th, I'm scheduled to do an interview on one of these Discords. I'm supposed to do an Ask Me Anything on one of the biggest Discords. It's got like 20,000 followers. So that's going to be fun. Zizek makes me curious about Francis Fukuyama. Francis Fukuyama, the end of history guy, the big theoretician of the fall of communism, right? Interesting fellow, right? And he argued that some of the premises of the Marxist narrative of world history were correct, right? But that it was just the end of history. Capitalism was the last system, but yes, the Marxist narrative was right up until then, and that we've entered the final system. And the Discord is called Blue Politics, by the way. That's who I'll be doing an AMA with. So that should be fun. And a lot of people have reached out to me. Are you familiar with Michael Hudson? If so, what do you think of his work? I know a lot about Michael Hudson. I've studied his work about the history of debt. He talks about, yeah, I believe he's related to Trotsky, like he's like the godson of Trotsky or something like that. Very interesting stuff. Yeah, I know Michael Hudson's work, and I learn a lot from it. And he talks about overproduction quite a bit, which is that's such an essential concept in Marx. And it's so lost. People think Marx was just talking about workers and bosses and how it's unfair, but Marx was showing how it very much it leads to an economic collapse. Michael Hudson is great, and I know his work is very widely loved in China nowadays. So yes, I'm a fan of Hudson. I recommend people check out Michael Hudson. I'm a fan for sure. I enjoy his work absolutely. But yes, folks, yes, I've been doing a lot of reading and research for this new book, and there's been a lot of attempts to study communists. And, there's been a lot of attempts. There was Edgar Sheen. He wrote this book called Coercive Persuasion. And it was a book all about why people become communists. Why do the Chinese communists, why are they able to convert American GIs after they catch them? Very fascinating stuff. And the ruling class of the United States has often developed what you can call counter gangs. And this is very much a 1960s phenomenon, where, and there was a book, Gangs and Counter Gangs, written by a British intelligence officer, where they talk about how one of the best ways to defeat an insurgency is by creating what they call a counter gang, right? And this was very commonly done. And in Kenya, when there was the Mau Mau, were fighting against the British, the Land and Freedom Army, one of the ways the British defeated them was by developing what they called counter gangs. And then in Northern Ireland, the British intelligence, they armed the Ulster Unionist groups, and they armed ultra-leftist groups that would attack the IRA. Part of the way that they worked against the Provisional Irish Republican Army was with counter gangs, and that counter gangs, that's a really common tactic, and it's attempting to appeal to the same feelings that drive people towards socialism and communism, appealing to those feelings and building kind of a fanatical group that espouses to be revolutionary, but has anti-communist goals. That's very interesting, right? And I mean, it reminds you, the words of Adolf Hitler kind of ring in your mind, because Adolf Hitler, he wrote Mein Kampf. And in Mein Kampf, he makes very clear that the reason the Kaiser in Germany could not defeat the Marxists was because the Kaiser was only defending the status quo. And he writes, he says, National Socialism is an attempt to build a revolutionary movement to defeat communism. That was the purpose of Nazism, was to defeat communism. But it had, in order to effectively do it, it had to appeal to some of those revolutionary aesthetics and impulses that attracted people to communism, right? And counter gangs. I mean, it's fascinating. Probably one of the most well-known counter gangs, I would say, is the Unification Church. And if you look at them, it's fascinating, right? The Unification Church. This was Reverend Sun Myung Moon, right? He was a South Korean minister who claimed he was the second coming of Jesus. And he built this fanatical group of anti-communists. And they own the Washington Times, which is the main conservative newspaper in Washington, D.C. They own the New Yorker Hotel here in New York City. And they're based in South Korea, and they're a counter gang. And what's interesting is if you read their writing, if you read Reverend Moon's Divine Principle, he actually says the goal is to create a socialistic economy. But they have to defeat, quote unquote, state socialism first. They're almost like Trotskyites or anarchists or something. They are quite a bizarre group. But again, it was appealing. It was telling people that they were kind of a revolutionary movement, and they actually adopted a lot of the new leftist aesthetics as well. They claimed to be a peace movement, right? A world peace movement. They went around selling flowers and candles. They almost appeared like hippies in a lot of ways. They had little communes where people would live on them. The Moonies, people called them, but the Unification Church. And the Unification Church was very much a counter gang. And communists told me in 1980, right? After Reagan won the election and was inaugurated, the Workers' World Party and the Communist Workers' Party, which was a Maoist group, which was around at that time, and a lot of other people, they had a huge rally at the Pentagon, and it was called the People's Anti-War Mobilization, PAM. And it was the first major anti-war rally to ever have a Palestinian speaker. It was the first major anti-war rally to have an LGBT speaker. It was this huge rally, and it was the Workers' World Party and the Communist Workers' Party. They put it together mainly, but they got a lot of people to come. It was like all the old anti-war protesters came to the Pentagon to protest against Reaganism and against Ronald Reagan. And what was interesting, 100% with your views. I'm shocked that I agree with the majority of it. I'm glad leftists are out there. Well, thanks, Tyler. I'm glad you like what I have to say. Super chat appreciated. But yeah, what's fascinating is that they had this rally, and the Unification Church was sent. They sent all their members all throughout New York City, all throughout Washington, D.C., to rip down the posters of this anti-imperialist rally. Very interesting. Very interesting. The Unification Church is very, very closely tied in with a lot of Republican congressmen. But what's also fascinating is, I don't know if people are aware, but the American Indian movement, Russell Means, became closely tied to the Moonies, to the Unification Church. Now, the American Indian movement, AIM, was a group that fought for the rights of Native Americans on the reservations, right? And they did some very radical stuff, seizing buildings, seizing Alcatraz Island. They were very militant, fighting for the rights of Native Americans, seizing the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But in the 1980s, Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian movement, he interestingly, he got on board with the CIA to fight the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. We know that's the government of Nicaragua, right? They're the Marxist Christian government that they have in Nicaragua. And Russell Means was very opposed to the Sandinistas, and they sent Russell Means where, the United States started giving guns and weapons to the Mosquito Native Americans. There was Native American tribes on the eastern part, in the eastern Nicaragua, who were being armed by the CIA to fight against the Sandinistas. And they sent Russell Means, the leader of the American Indian movement, to Nicaragua. And then the Moonies, the Unification Church, paid for a speaking tour by Russell Means. And he went around the country telling people that were socialists and communists not to support the Sandinistas because they were racist against Native Americans. right? Even though the majority of people in Nicaragua who supported the Sandinistas did have indigenous blood, right? There were certain tribes that didn't use technology and still are. These tribes are there, still there, right? And the government has a relationship with those tribes, and it's touchy. There are certain tribes, that were anti-Sandinista, and were being armed by the CIA, and Russell Means was kind of doing propaganda for them. And yes, he eventually became a libertarian. I believe he was the running mate of a libertarian candidate at one point. Russell Means is an interesting figure, but he was a leftist, right? And he did a whole lot of left-wing activism, right? I mean, he was somebody that the Black Panthers negotiated with. He fought for the rights of Native Americans, but in the 1980s, he became tied in with the CIA and tied in with the Moonies, with the Unification Church, on the basis of anti-communism. And again, that theme that we've talked about a lot on these lives, right? About how you don't see the results. Syria, the war in Syria that has escalated since 2011, is very much the Nicaraguan war done more strategically and effectively, right? The war in Nicaragua, right? You had a socialist revolution in Nicaragua. You had a government that came to power, which was not a Marxist-Leninist government. It was a socialist government, right? The Sandinistas, they were Christians, right? They had Catholic priests in the government. They had some kind of indigenous beliefs. Today, the Sandinista slogan is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. They build these kind of life trees around the country that are kind of indigenous, and they have their own kind of beliefs, right? They're inspired by Marxism and socialism, definitely communist and socialist, but they kind of like China, kind of like socialism with Chinese characteristics. They have socialism in Nicaragua with Nicaraguan characteristics, when the United States started funding terrorists and extremists to fight against the government of Nicaragua, right? At that point, you had a strong Marxist left in the United States that started protesting against it. And because these terrorists and extremists that were fighting the government of Nicaragua, a lot of them were evangelical Christians and Pentecostals who'd been trained at the School of the Americas and whatnot, they would kill Catholic priests and nuns. And so because of that, the Vatican was opposed to U.S. support for the terrorists in Nicaragua. And you had, a lot of great protesting, right? There was the Nicaraguan Network. There were people who confronted George Bush, that was head of the CIA and was vice president under Reagan, and people confronting him about it, saying, why are you killing priests and nuns in Nicaragua? And, there was a whole protest movement about it. And the CIA was trying to figure out, how do we sell our operation to overthrow the Sandinistas? How do we sell it to leftists? How do we convince socialists and leftists and people on the college campuses who might become, radical? How do we convince them that being radical and opposing the system and opposing racism and all that stuff, how do we convince young leftists? How do we convince young leftists to support our operation? Well, what did they do? They started arming the Mosquito Native Americans, and they hired Russell Means, and they had this AIM radical go around the country telling people, oh, the Sandinistas are racist, and Marxism is just another white man's ideology. And Russell Means was very popular among that anarchist crowd. And who was the speechwriter and the main ideological, coach of Russell Means during this time? Who was advising Russell Means about how to put out this CIA propaganda against the government of Nicaragua? Who was it? Ward Churchill. Do people know Ward Churchill? The name Ward Churchill? Well, if you watched Fox News in around 2004, 2005, you couldn't miss him, right? Ward Churchill was a professor at the University of Colorado. And he was, he's a Native American scholar, and he was the main advisor to Russell Means during this period. And he advised Russell Means, and he was very anti-Sandinista. Very, very interesting. And, Ward Churchill got fired. There was a whole hateful right-wing Fox News campaign against him. But it's all very fascinating, right? It's all very fascinating how these connections are made, right? It's worth looking into. So, again, the war in Syria, right? Started out with the Arab Spring. They sold it with all those leftist aesthetics, right? People thought it was the revolution in the streets, Che Guevara, marching, protesting. They tried to tie it in with Occupy Wall Street, and started that way. Then they had these fanatical religious groups, these Wahhabis that did the fighting. But now we've got this argument. This is really widespread. They've paid a lot of people to go out and say that if you don't support the USA arming terrorist and extremist groups to overthrow the Syrian government, then you're Islamophobic, right? Linda Sarsour, right? She's the Democratic Party, she's this big person in progressive circles, right? Linda Sarsour, always has been having anti-Assad, anti-Syrian government rallies for years. And why? Why? Because she's trying to, and what's so ironic about it is that the Syrian government, it protects religious minorities. Right? That's one of the main reasons that people don't want the Syrian government to fall. Right? And so the idea that you're racist or you're Islamophobic if you don't support it falling, one of the main reasons the Syrian government shouldn't fall is because there'll be genocide of the Alawites, there'll be genocide of the Christians, right? And that these terrorist groups that are trying to overthrow the Syrian government, most of them are fighting to create a Wahhabi state. They want to create another Saudi Arabia in Syria, right? They're not fighting for the freedom of those folks. They're fighting to take freedom away. They hate Christians. They hate Alawites. They claim that Alawites, like Shia in Iran, are Shia apostates worthy of the death penalty, right? Read about how these forces have gone into churches and killed all kinds of Christians. But again, no one talks about it, right? Because they have, just like Russell Means, tried to sell the war to leftists by saying it was this hip Native American thing to oppose the Sandinistas. Now in the United States, oh, you're Islamophobic. It's maniacally brilliant the way they operate, the way they manipulate leftists, and the way they distort leftist discourse. It's very, very maniacal. So it's worth looking into, right? And that the role that Ward Churchill played, the role that Russell Means played, it's fascinating. But even if you look at the Moonies themselves, this is a group that presented themselves as hippies, a peace movement. They live in communes. They sell flowers. But if you look at what they believe, it's that this Korean guy, Reverend Moon, was sent to Earth as the second coming of Jesus Christ to unify all Christians into a holy war against communism. They're one of the most right-wing groups, tied to every right-wing foundation you ever met. But on the surface, they had that kind of hippie left aesthetic. And that aesthetic, I will add, is not particularly left. And that's a whole nother agenda, a whole nother conversation. What else is on people's minds, folks? If you haven't done this already, tweet this out. Make this a bigger conversation. Bring more people on board. Let's talk. Let's chat. Let's have a good conversation. Let's have a great conversation. I am ready to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Super chats are appreciated. Regular chats are appreciated. Bring your friends. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. More people, more the merrier. Let's do our thing. I'm in no rush to get anywhere. Coronavirus has got us stuck at home. I don't know if folks saw the thumbnail for this chat was me jogging. I go out every day. I did it 6 days this week, right? I started on Monday. I've done it every day. I go out and run, and I jog, and I work up a sweat running because I'm just trying to not just be lumping around the house. And it's been good for my mind. It gets my brain going, right? I think of things. If you sit around the house all day, you get this kind of, you know what I'm saying? Neon Noir is saying that Kim might be dead. Let's wait for confirmation, right? I'm hearing different things about that. Like I said, we don't know, right? I'm in the last live, we talked about how these rumors come out. Insider comment question. Do you think that the recent popularity of DSA and Marcyism will continue after Bernie? And hey, Maddie McAllister. Well, here's the thing. DSA. Okay, so I've talked about this DSA. Well, I talked a whole lot about, the ragged trouser philanthropist, as George Galloway recommends it. Oh, okay, well, I'll have to read it. George Galloway is someone I have absolute great admiration for, so I'll have to download that book and read it immediately, because George Galloway is amazing. So DSA, right? I talked about their history. That's the Michael Harrington trend. It emerged, as kind of hardline communist groups were kind of falling apart in the 70s. You had this kind of regroupment around social democracy, Michael Harrington, Irving Howe, a lot of the more social democratic folks, Gloria Steinem and others. And, it was kind of, the State Department socialist trend, kind of, the folks who'd been around Shachtman and those kind of folks that were not not radical, not anti-imperialist, but more social democratic and reformist. Those kind of forces that, they formed DSA. But now DSA is much more open. Now DSA, anyone can join DSA. They don't have it's a very different animal than it was when it started. Marxism, the thing about Marxism, right? And I don't think Marxism is really growing in the United States, honestly. I think that it's filling a void, right? I mean, and I've said this on other lives. I wasn't, I was a Marxist for many years. I was in a particular one of the Marxite trends. And the reason for that was because it was still around. This was a hardline communist party that was still around, right? And most of the hardline communist parties, in most countries around the world, you have the official Communist Party. Then you would have a Trotskyist group, and then there were some Maoist groups. And I was around a Maoist group for a while, but the Marxists, they seemed like they had the line of a regular Communist Party, but they were a little bit more radical sounding, and they did a little more like activism kind of stuff. What's weird though is that Marxism is a very, very unique. It's a very unique trend, right? It comes out of Trotskyism. You talk to the old Marcyites, they think that they're the one true Trotskyist party in the world. Every other Trotskyist just doesn't read Trotsky right. What's kind of interesting is that, when Marxism, and this is very inside baseball. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but when Marxism was first growing, they didn't run the rallies. They were not the people organizing the rallies, putting up the stage and having the sign and, having the marshals to kick out anyone who disagreed that wasn't how they did things. When they started, they were kind of a radical street fighting group. Read about Youth Against War and Fascism, YOF, it was called. And they wore like football helmets to their rallies, and they did a lot of, almost like left adventurist kind of activity, going out and doing a lot of like street kind of militancy. They would wave the Viet Cong or the NLF flag, and they were kind of this group. And that Sam Marcy recruited a lot of young people because he was into that street fighting radicalism. It wasn't really until the mid 70s that they started, they started kind of stage managing rallies. The first time they did it was against the racist Boston busing rallies. They had a rally called Say No to Racism. It was a big mobilization against the racism in Boston. Then they did the People's Anti-War Mobilization in 1981, I believe, 1981, after Reagan was inaugurated. And that was their history. And at the time that Marcy died, like in the 90s, that was kind of what they became, is they became stage managers of the movement. But, that was kind of the role they had taken on in the aftermath of the 1960s as the Socialist Workers' Party fell apart, the SWP, right? The SWP, they sued the FBI, and then the organization started to fall apart. So they started taking on the role as kind of the stage managers of the rallies. But you have to, that was just one phase, but then Marcy died, and so it just kind of continued. So that's kind of interesting, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. What else is on people's minds? Yeah, what else is on people's minds here? China's anti-poverty drive is great. I think what China's doing to fight poverty is tremendous. And I think it's really great what they are doing. Really fascinating. Really, really. I mean, I don't know if people saw. I did a great interview with Dylan Walker. Dylan Walker. And Dylan Walker's a young guy, studies in China, and he was on like a Chinese TV show singing, in perfect Chinese, singing like communist songs, and it was like a sensation. And I did a great interview. He and I talked for like an hour, 40 minutes or so yesterday. I posted the video of him on Chinese TV. You should all really, really check it out. You should really check it out. So yeah, I really recommend it. I really do recommend it. And, like I said, I'm excited about the Center for Political Innovation. I mean, it needs to be done, right? Something needs to be done. I haven't seen Planet of the Humans, and I don't want to. I am disappointed. Michael Moore is somebody, it's interesting. Michael Moore, when I was a high school student, I was against the Iraq War. I was against George W. Bush. Still am, obviously. So I was a supporter of Michael Moore, and I liked Bowling for Columbine, and I liked Fahrenheit 9/11, and I was constantly, people, it was weird. Like I remember, kids at school, teachers would say to me, everything in that's a lie. Don't you know that's a lie? And I would say, name one thing that's a lie. They couldn't tell me what was a lie. So I was defending Michael Moore. I was constantly defending Michael Moore. They had that 2004 election. They said it was, Pat Buchanan said it was Michael Moore versus Mel Gibson. I liked Michael Moore. And then he made that movie Sicko, which is one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. Amazing documentary about healthcare. Just an amazing, amazing film. An amazing film. Great movie. And you know what's interesting about Sicko is, do you know who one of the financial supporters of the film was? Jared Kushner. Right? That relative of Donald Trump was heavily involved in making a lot of money from Obamacare. And so he supported it. And there's interviews with Jared Kushner. The issue with online debates is YouTube content rather than ideas, honest exchange of ideas. Yeah, internet debates can be weird. I do the best I can. Some are good, some are not. But yeah, Jared Kushner was a big supporter of it. But yeah, I mean, it was a great movie. And he made Where to Invade Next, which was it was social democratic. And I went to see it with a few friends, and it was a little bit, it didn't, it was like, he has this message, and he pushes it in Capitalism, a Love Story. One of my old roommates is in the movie Capitalism, a Love Story. How ironic is that? And a couple people I did activism with are also in the movie at various points. In Capitalism, a Love Story, in Where to Invade Next, he gives this analysis, which is on the surface level true, right? It's kind of like, well, the reason that in Europe they have bigger welfare states, in France, in Germany, and England, Britain, they have bigger welfare states, is because people over there protest more. Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. No doubt about it. People in countries with bigger social democratic state, with more stronger unions and all of that, they have bigger unions, they have bigger leftist and socialist groups. That's true, but there's more to it than that, right? Is that, a lot of these countries, imperialism has a lot to do with it, right? That the Western capitalist countries were able to create these welfare states because they were, the centers of imperialism, right? And that they'd been, they built up their wealth and their place in the world economy with imperialism, number one. And also, a big reason we don't have a bigger welfare state in the United States is because of racism. Let me repeat that. One of the main reasons we don't have a big welfare state in the United States is because of racism, right? Think about it, your whole life, right? Whenever you talk to people about issues like healthcare, like food stamps, like government assistance, race immediately comes into the conversation. Immediately comes in to the conversation. Immediately race comes into the conversation, right? Immediately. And the race question in the United States is essential, right? The majority of people in the United States who get food stamps are white. However, food stamps, as we've discovered, has become a racist code word, right? And there's a lot of white people who are against food stamps because in their mind, the only people who get it are black, right? And that when people are able to transfer, it's not another person that they just care about who is without food. When they're able to have this prejudice against an other, right? The class struggle in the United States has been polluted by racism. It has been absolutely polluted by racism. I mean, there's a great documentary I saw when Bill Clinton got rid of welfare as we know it, was throwing all these women, with children off of welfare. There's a great documentary that I watched where there's a white woman in Appalachia. She works at a gas station, and she's losing her welfare. And she keeps giving interviews in this documentary explaining that, it's good they're getting rid of welfare because all these black people, they abuse the welfare system. I mean, I actually need it, but there's all these black people and it's awful, right? People talk about welfare mother as like a code word, right? And that you can't ignore the role that racism plays in all of this. And that the way they get a lot of white people to be against social programs is by convincing them that only black people benefit from them and playing into racial stereotypes they have about black people, right? And that's the reality, right? Is that the race question has polluted the class struggle in the United States. Absolutely polluted it. right? Absolutely polluted the class struggle in the United States. And you can't get beyond that. And, you know, there's a reason. How you made a video a while back. Can someone repeat that super chat? It went by too fast. I made a video a while back. I'll answer it, but I just have to see the rest of it. I've made a lot of videos. So can someone repeat the super chat so I can see what it is so I can answer it? Be happy to answer it. You made a video a while back. You made a video a while back. You made a video a while back about how happy. Oh, about how to be happy. Right. Well, that's the thing, right? That's the thing. I mean, I made a video called Socialism and Happiness, which is one of my better videos, where I just talked about what it is that attracts people to socialism. I talked about one of my comrades when I was in a group who always wore a Palestine hat. I talked about Bulgaria. I talked about socialist countries. But there was also things, I mean, I've made suggestions to people about things they can do to keep their mood up, right? I've urged people to listen to classical music rather than modern music, right? Modern music is full of explosive emotions, and it's better to listen to classical music. It's a way to stabilize things. I've urged people to listen to classical music to improve their moods. Exercise, right? That's what I'm doing. I told you guys, I'm going out and jogging, and it's great. I mean, this coronavirus time can be a difficult time, but I've been exercising, Another thing that I recommend people do is don't let social media control you, right? Turn off the notifications. Go and check your Facebook when you want to go and check your Facebook. Go and check your Twitter when you want to check it. Don't chase after social media, right? That's one thing. I know a lot of people, they chase social media. It's every 2 seconds they have to look at their phone. Don't. Decide when you're going to look at your phone and do it, right? That's one thing I've often urged people to do. And I feel like when you're in that mindset where you're chasing after every 2 seconds, oh, there's another notification. Oh, my phone. Oh, don't do that. Don't play that game, right? To the friends, the people, the friends, the coworkers, the colleagues you need to talk to, give them your phone numbers. They can text you. But when it comes to Facebook messages, when it comes to, Twitter and notifications, just handle that carefully, right? Because it's interesting. They've done studies about this. It gives you like a buzz every time someone likes you, every time someone shares you, right? That it's the same like thrill people get from gambling, right? And that's what you're doing. When you post a picture, it gives you this thrill. You don't know how many people are going to like it. You don't know how many people are going to share it. It gives you this thrill, right? And it's pretty addictive. And so it's important. It's important to not let social media rule over you, not let social media control you. Just kind of use social media for your benefit, but don't let it control you. What other advice do people want? I don't know. I mean, I hope that's helpful to people. I know a lot of people are struggling. And like I said, I'm going out and exercising every day. I made a commitment to myself that that's what I'm going to do. And that's helped a lot. That's helped me loads, right? To go out, to work up a sweat, listen to some speeches. I always listen to speeches while I exercise, right? I like to hear, talking, right? I listen to classical music around the house because it's very stabilizing. It's very predictable. It's got a lot of patterns. I've also been playing a lot of internet chess lately, chess.com. I'm on level 4, and I've won 9 games on level 4. So if I can do one more game on level 4 of internet chess, I will start playing level 5 internet chess. I am not good at chess whatsoever. I am not a chess master. Chess is not my field of expertise, but that's why I want to do it, right? It's like a hobby, and it stimulates that part of my mind that I don't use as much, right? I'm very good at, a lot of things, as you all know. I remember a lot of politics, and I can talk and, and write and stuff, but the part of my mind that would be good at chess is not the strongest part. So that's why I play chess, to stimulate it, right? John F. Kennedy, he said, "We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." Well, find things that are hard for you and do them, right? Think about it. There's something that you don't, that it's difficult for you to do. So find out what it is, right? It's like something intellectual, something that your mind just isn't good at. Figure out what it is and do it, right? Because that'll force that part of your mind to get better, to get stronger, right? It's interesting, right? A lot of us are very, very specific, right? We're very, very good in one or two areas and we lack in other areas. So find those areas we're lacking and stimulate them a little bit. That's what I would urge people to do. Don't, following on social media, can you talk more about conspiracy? I'm sorry, David, it went by too fast. Talk more about conspiracy. Can someone repeat the super chat? I want to answer David's question. David is a great friend out there in Australia, and I want to answer his question. Uh, Following up on social media, can you answer more about conspiracy? What is it? What is it? What is it, David? About conspiracy theorists, fascists, and the protests against the lockdowns. Got it. You know, I'm sorry, folks, but I mean, the people that say this is all just a big hoax and no one has coronavirus. I know people who have coronavirus, okay? I mean, I'm obviously not talking to them. I haven't touched them or anything, but there are people, if you look at my social media page, I know through 6 degrees of separation and social media, there are some people that have coronavirus. This is real. This is a reality, and, the film your hospital thing. I mean, it's shocking, but what it really is that the lower levels of the bourgeoisie in the United States are losing their profits. They're getting killed right now. Amazon is going to come out ahead. Amazon is going to win big out of this. Amazon will be untouchable. They will come out of this stronger than ever, right? They're hiring people. Their stock is at all-time high, right? But small businesses are, how many people they own, for example? How many people own a hair salon? Right, think about it. You own a hair salon, you're screwed. You're screwed. You're going to miss a month of appointments, right? These people cut maybe 5, 6 people's hair a day. That's their bread and butter. They're screwed. They are screwed, right? I could use a haircut right now. So could a lot of people. But we can't go to the haircut place, so they're screwed. So, you think about these capitalists that own businesses that are getting screwed right now. They're desperate to turn this back on for their own profits. That's why Glenn Beck says outrageous things like we should just let the older folks die. The lower level of the bourgeoisie that just support, that just are all about their profits. Bill Gates is making a killing too, as David. Yeah, Bill Gates is doing great. The Silicon Valley crowd are doing great. And the big oil companies, right? Let's remember, now they're not selling lots of oil, but they're watching the price of oil plummet, and they're watching the fracking companies all go out of business. They're watching their competitors all get screwed, so they're doing great. There are certain capitalists that would like to keep things shut down as long as possible, and there's other capitalists that would like to get things turned back on immediately. This is about the bottom line. This is a financial question. And at the same time, let's also remember that a lot of the protests are happening in states where people are not as densely populated. Here in New York City, it's really densely populated. It's all apartment buildings. I mean, there's so many people packed into such a little space. But, you go out to Iowa and Kansas, there's wide open spaces. So the virus doesn't spread as fast out there, right? To be fair. So there's an element of not wanting the rules of New York to apply. But on another level, I have to ask myself, what do these protesters want? What do they want? Right? They'll liberate us, turn our state back on. We want to work. I want to work too. Trust me, I'm not happy about this. I want to be able to go and eat in a restaurant. I want to be able to go to the movies. I want to be able to just wake up, take a shower, and go to work. I want to have my normal life. But, we all want that. We all want that. But yeah, people talk about evictions, right? Now they've frozen evictions here in New York, but I've heard that around the country that's not the case. I've also heard that people aren't getting their Social Security and stuff. I mean, this is outrageous. We know the capitalists, they're talking a nice game. Oh, everyone's going to be taken care of. Everyone's going to be taken care of. We know they're going to try to screw people. We know that. We know that. We know they are going to try to screw people pretty soon. They are. I mean, they absolutely are. And we have to be prepared for that. And that's why coming out of this, we need to build some kind of organization. We need to build community where people don't feel left behind, where they feel like they belong someplace. They feel like someone's looking out for them. That's why I started with the whole Frankenstein thing at the beginning of this live. I wanted to kind of make that clear. We need to build a socialist community. And that's what I'm trying to do with the Center for Political Innovation. If you want to help out, you can get involved. The website's down below. You can donate. You can help us out. We need to build a socialist community. We need. And I'll have more specifics soon. People are asking how much money we need and such. Yes, I will have more specifics soon. Right now, things are all kind of on hold because of the coronavirus and everything. But we will soon come to you, because we need to get going. We need to build an organization. Can you touch on alienation among the youth? Well, you talk about alienation, right? Karl Marx, he writes about alienated labor. Oh, Australia just observed Anzac Day, Australian imperialism and its effect on Australian politics. Wow. Well, I mean, I know that the indigenous population of Australia has not been treated well at all, um, and that there's some ugly history there. But I also know that there's a lot of class struggle in Australia. The miners have been very militant. There's been strong labor movements in Australia, people fighting for their rights. And also, there's a lot of people in Australia who very much are happy to do business with China and don't buy into the anti-China, um, you know, don't buy into the anti-China agenda. So Australia is an interesting place, and yeah, I mean, so there you go. I mean, and I mean, people talk about. There's an old joke, right, that a man is applying to move to Australia. He's applying for a visa, right? And they're asking him the questions on the visa. And he's a British man. He's an Englishman. He's a really stuck up kind of an Englishman. Yeah, so I'm filling out my application to go to Australia. Yeah, and they say to him, okay, so, what is your name? My name is John Sterlington. I'm going to Australia. Yes, I am. Okay. What is your application? Oh, I'm a stockbroker. I'm going to Australia. Yes. And then they ask him, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And he says, oh, damn, is it still required? But yes, I hope that's not offensive to any of my Australian friends. I hope that's taken in good fun. But yeah, I mean, we remember that they were deporting people from Britain. They were deporting them to Australia, right? And there's a lot of Irish folks in Australia. A lot of people in Australia with Irish heritage because of that. A lot of people, I mean, that was, they were, there's a lot of people in Australia who were convicted of crimes or whatever. And some of that music. I mean, it's weird. If you listen to Waltzing Matilda or Wild Colonial Boy, a lot of that is pretty anti-establishment and populist, right? I mean, Waltzing Matilda is, this guy who's stolen a sheep or whatever is killed, right? And people say that the song actually goes back to a strike and a labor struggle in Australia, which is fascinating. I don't know that whole story very well, but I know that the song actually does have class struggle roots, which I think is fascinating. But also, you think of the Wild Colonial Boy, read about Ned Kelly. I mean, there is kind of an outlaw culture. Australia is an interesting place. I've never been there, and I need to get there. I think I would learn. And I continue to meet Australian folks. It's amazing. I don't know what it is, the YouTube algorithms or what it is, but I am constantly, of all the English-speaking countries in the world, I am constantly meeting Australians. I think it's really cool, and I'm glad. I mean, it's great. Australia seems like a great place. I got to get out there sometime. Alienation among the youth. When Marx wrote about alienated labor, he was referring to the fact that we had French Canadian fighters, tall poodle martyrs, Irish rebels, English chartists. Yeah, I believe it. Great. That's a great mix. No wonder you got folks there that are interested in what I have to say. It sounds like you come from very good stock. But alienation, right? So when Marx wrote about alienation, he wrote about alienated labor. And he was talking about the fact that a craftsman puts their soul into their art, a wood carver, a tailor, right? Somebody makes, when somebody is a craftsman or a skilled craftsman, they themselves make a product that it's unique to them. It's their creation, right? A weaver, that they themselves put their soul into the product. And that when industrial production and factories got going, that was eliminated. That people had no relation to the product that they produced, right? They're just working on the line, they're sweating. There's none of their soul. And this is true, right? At an auto plant. Do you think that auto workers, that they spiritually have this connection, that car is like a creation of, no, they're punching in, they're doing their work, they're getting paid, they're going home. And that was what Marx wrote about, is that it took away some of the dignity of work, some of the pride of work, some of the spiritual connection people had with their product, right, was taken away by industrial production, right? And people talk about how they're alienated from their labor, right? That when a worker is at work, he doesn't want to be there. He wants to get out of there as fast as he can. He's selling his time. You know, when a worker, I believe Marx said, when a worker is at work, he is not at home, and when he's at home, he is not at work, right? That the product that the worker creates has no real impact on him. He's not building it because he believes in it. He's not building it because, because it's something he believes in doing. He's getting a paycheck. It's his job, right? That's alienation, and that's what Karl Marx was talking about with the concept of alienation. But alienation is also the separation of people from other people, right? The inability of people to make connections, to bond, right? The social alienation, the separation of people. I think that's what Madison was getting at, right? Is the way that capitalism kind of separates people from each other, drives them apart, and that happens a lot, especially when workers are competing with each other, especially with phones, how we're all just kind of in our phones. It separates people. And it makes people kind of divorced from each other. It drives a wedge between people. And that capitalism does that, and especially when people are judged as commodities, right? When people are constantly having to sell themselves to their employers, to other people, it leads to this breakdown in the ability of people to form real, meaningful connections and to have real hope and spiritual bonds with other people. It breaks all that down. People say that Marxism is just cold materialism. It doesn't have any interest in connecting. It's all just this cold mechanical. I don't see it that way at all. I see Marxism as very, very spiritual. It's very, very, very much speaking to the essence of human beings, right? It was scientific. It was materialist, but to say that it's just cold, right? Ayn Rand, that stuff is cold, right? When we talk about cold economics, look at neoliberalism. I don't see Marxism that way. I think Marxism is being very, very concerned about the deeper matters, and Madison agrees with me, and I appreciate that. What else do people want me to talk about? What else is on people's minds? So someone said that's the way that corporations want it. Absolutely. And that's part of the curse of Facebook and social media. I talk about that in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, about how social media has really done a number. What do you think of those passionate Tesla employees wanting to remove carbon and creating a clean energy vehicle, grade battery shortage, peak oil? Wow. Well, folks, I do believe electric cars are the way of the future. They're absolutely the way of the future. And that fossil fuels are a prison for humanity. They are absolutely a prison for humanity. The fossil fuel based global order, where Rockefeller and Carnegie and DuPont sit at the global center of the world economy. We need to get out of this. And we need nuclear power, right? And the opposition to nuclear power, that needs to be gotten rid of, right? Nuclear power needs to be done safely. We should want it to be safely regulated. There's nothing wrong with nuclear power, right? But fusion energy, that would be amazing. Electric cars are amazing. What China's doing with their experiments right now is amazing. And we have to get out of the trap of fossil fuels. And yes, global warming is a reality. And yes, fossil fuels contribute to it tremendously, right? I am not a climate change denier, right? I think climate change is a reality. But at the same time, I'm not a Malthusian. I'm not a pessimist. I don't believe that we need to end human progress. I think climate change is the reason we need to go forward. And that's why I have no interest in seeing this new Michael Moore movie, because it's going to be that pessimistic, people like stuff too much, why can't people live a simpler life? I mean, it's going to be anti-historical progress. And that's not the Michael Moore I liked. I was disappointed. My wife and I, we actually saw him in person. During the 2016 election, he came out with this movie, Trumpland, right? And so we went and, Michael Moore, you can go and see Michael Moore. He'll speak at the beginning of the movie. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not a fan of that movie. Let me put it that way. I almost said some nasty words about it that I might regret at some point. But, I mean, it was just Michael Moore talking on a stage. And, I mean, some of the insights about Trump were amusing. But some of the other things he said in the movie, that movie, Trumpland, it just didn't sit well with me. I mean, and that was an election, honestly, I wasn't sure. I mean, Trump may have been better than Hillary Clinton, honestly. I mean, Trump is bad in so many ways, but honestly, and I sat there in that theater and, I mean, there were things, I mean, first of all, he talked about why so many people wanted to vote for Trump. He talked about Brexit states, and that was powerful. That was a strong part of the movie. But like another thing in that movie that just didn't sit well with me, was when he talked about who was the guy in the Clinton administration who was like he committed suicide, and there were rumors that Hillary Clinton killed him. Right? I can't remember his name. He was like some kind of Clinton administration official, and he's talking about it. And at one point in the movie, he's just shilling for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's like, please, let's name things. He calls out to the audience, let's name things that are good about Hillary Clinton. And then he's talking about, this guy in the Clinton administration who killed himself, that all these people think Hillary Clinton killed, and he says, like, it would be so badass if she actually killed him. I mean, and it was disgusting. And it's like, even if, okay, so throw all the conspiracy aside, right? No, not Seth Rich, the other guy. Just throw all that aside, right? Throw all of that aside, and I'll talk about MEK in a bit. Throw all that aside. It's still a really sad story. When a father of kids kills himself, that's awful. And no, I don't want to Vince Foster, that's the name. It's not funny, right? And he's joking about it, number one. And then he's saying that, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Hillary Clinton had killed Vince Foster? No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't be cool to have a president who's a murderer. And that's what we all know about Hillary Clinton, right? Is that she is, I mean, look at her, the laughing she had on her face when Gaddafi was killed, right? Hillary Clinton doesn't have morals. She is somebody who takes pleasure in harming other people, right? So the idea that if she actually killed Vince Foster, it would be cool, it would be badass or something, give me a break. That was disgusting. I was fuming as I sat there, and I was in a movie theater. He had actually gotten up and talked before the movie. So, I could have walked up to him and given him a piece of my mind. But I was fuming when I heard that, he talks, Michael Moore loves to do this. He talks about his in the Trump movie, right, that he made. He talks all about his relationship with Trump when he's met Trump, in this movie, he's talking all about his relationship when he went to the White House, how he shook Hillary Clinton's hand. It was kind of gross, and that whole movie, it was just like, why am I watching this? This isn't right. So someone asked me to talk about MEK. MEK is a terrorist group. And that's not Caleb calling them a terrorist group. The U.S. State Department registered them as a terrorist group, right? They were listed as a designated foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department. The Mujahideen Khalq, MEK. And basically, they were a terrorist group. And during the 1970s, they were in Iran when Iran was still under the Shah. And you had the Tudeh party that was building labor unions in cities. You had the Fedayeen that were trying to do some kind of guerrilla, peasant war or something in the countryside. And then you had the Mujahideen Khalq, MEK, that were terrorists, and they did left adventurous terrorist bombings, assassinations, and they were like they called themselves Islamo-Marxists, and they believed that the leader of their group, whose name was Masoud Rajavi, was sent to Earth as a prophet to lead to unleash some kind of apocalyptic Islamo-Marxist global revolution. They carried out these assassinations and bombings. When the Iranian Revolution happened, initially they were very happy about it and excited. But then when Khomeini fired one of the clerics who was sympathetic to them and started making clear they wouldn't have a role in the new government, they went on a killing spree, and they killed all kinds of Iranians. They blew up buildings. They blew up the parliament. They were murderers. They were terrorists. And then Saddam Hussein hired them. And then during the Iraq-Iran war, Saddam Hussein airdropped them into Iran, and they razed villages to the ground and slaughtered people. This is a group of murderers. And they have their camps, people, and they would drag people around, with ropes around their necks, like as a form of torture. Can you imagine having your hands tied and having a rope around your neck and being dragged by a rope around your neck? They would torture people that way. These camps that they ran, you couldn't get out of it. People would try to leave the group. People would try to flee, and they'd be killed. It was a very, very dangerous counter gang, right? Maybe it started out, maybe it was just a group of fanatics who really believed in it. But, it became a group that was working for Saddam Hussein against the Iranian Revolution. And now it works for Israel. Now they work for Israel. Right? They work for Israel. They work for the U.S. government, right? Rudy Giuliani. Right, there's the real progressive, Rudy Giuliani, right? Tom Ridge Bush's director of Homeland Security, all the people who line up with them, they're a lot like the Unification Church. They have this, like, they want to present as progressive. But if you look at the essence of what they're really about, they're a counter gang. They're right-wing extremists. And I mean, every year at the UN, they have a big rally against Iran, and Iran speaking at the UN. And who speaks at that rally? You've got Dov Hikind, a former member of the JDL, right? The Jewish Defense League, a Zionist terrorist group. He speaks on the same platform as them, right? You got, all these mainstream Republicans, right? And it's so disgusting. Mainstream media in the United States just completely glosses over the reality of who they are. Can you imagine if Barack Obama had spoken on the stage with a group of Islamo-Marxists? They would have, like, killed him. Right? Republicans, Fox News, Islam, and Marxism are the two things they hate the most, but yet they'll bring on people from Mujahideen Khalq. I saw the Fox News interview they did with Maryam Rajavi, right? Who's their leader, the wife of Masood Rajavi. They bring him on. He says to her, "You're a lot like Martin Luther King Jr." No, she's not. No, she is not. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's the way U.S. media just kisses up to them. And let me add, they were designated for decades as a foreign terrorist organization. And who lifted the designation? Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was the head of the State Department, right? And she lifted the designation. She made it so they were no longer a designated terrorist group, right? But even when they were a designated terrorist group, even at the time they were a designated terrorist group, even at that time, Tanky Trotskyist asked, what are my thoughts on Bordega? I don't know enough about it. Even at the time they were a designated terrorist group, they were still, doing fundraisers with all kinds of mainstream politicians. It shows how the laws are not fairly enforced, right? I mean, Hillary Clinton finally delisted them, but long before that, the Republicans were embracing them, even though they were designated as a terrorist group. And yeah, I mean, it's at this point they're a counter gang. And they set up shop in Albania, of all places. Albania. That's where they're operating. And you're not allowed to criticize them in Albania. There have been people in Albania who've spoken up about them, have talked negatively about them, and they get, like, suppressed, right? The Albanian government, right? Ever since the overthrow of socialism, Albania's government has been very weak. It's been very much a puppet of the West. There's been an expansion of Wahhabi ideas among Muslims in Albania. The Christian community feels very persecuted. And now the Mujahideen Khalq has set up shop in Albania, and they run like troll farms from there, from what I understand. They have people that sit on Facebook and Twitter all day tweeting out crazy stuff. I've screamed at them before. I mean, I confront them at the UN when I see them. And so they don't like me. They know who I am, and they don't much care for me. And, well, there you go. Yeah, but, they have their rally. They'll set up in front of the UN. It'll be like, human rights in Iran. We just believe in human rights. Bullshit. You believe in mass murder and terrorism and killing. You killed Americans back in the 70s. You've killed thousands of Iranians. You've killed thousands of Iraqis. Bullshit. Bullshit. You're not a human rights group. You are a Zion. I mean, I'm sorry. When I was in Iran, they took me to the site where a university professor of physics, a physics professor, was walking to teach his class at a university in Tehran, and they killed him. They blew him away. Killed him, right? In a joint operation with Israel, the Mujahideen Khalq murdered peaceful nuclear energy scientists. Bullshit. They are not a human rights organization. And this is what they do, mind you. MEK is very, very interesting. If you go to events in New York City that are Muslim events, they'll walk around. We're just a Muslim organization. We're a group of Muslims who are persecuted in Iran. We're a Muslim organization. However, you go to Republican events, they're Muslims. Oh, what? We're not Muslims. No. We're a human rights group. We're against, repression. We're against the Islamic Republic. Oh, no. Oh, Muslim. Oh, no. Right? You go to a left-wing event in New York City. We're communists. Oh, yeah, we're a communist group in Iran, and we're persecuted. They're bullshit. They're not Muslims. They're not communists, and they're not human rights activists. They're bullshit. They're bullshit. I mean, that's all they are. They're a bullshit counter gang. They're a dangerous CIA cult, and I have no respect for them whatsoever. So there you go. They work with the Mossad. They work with the CIA. They're regime change activists. They're working to destabilize the Middle East, to create chaos in the Middle East. No respect for them whatsoever. And there are a lot of Iranian communists who have mixed feelings about the Islamic Republic, but they still hate MEK. It's kind of like Falun Gong. There's a lot of Chinese people, right, who don't like the Chinese government, whatever. They don't like it, right? They're anti-communist, but they hate the Falun Gong, right? Counter gangs are a unique formation. These are cults. These are fanatical groups of people that are brainwashed and, a lot of Koreans who are against North Korea, who are anti-communist, who have hatred for Reverend Moon. That's one thing. You talk to the Korean community. Koreans, they all know who Reverend Moon is, but a lot of them hate Reverend Moon. Will tell you he's the Antichrist. It's kind of funny. I remember, in New York City, there's you see people on the street, and as somebody who used to pass out leaflets a lot as an activist, I always feel kind of respectful of anyone who's doing outreach. Whenever someone's handing out a leaflet for a Christian group or a Buddhist group or a whatever, I respect them on some level. When I see the Nation of Islam, I always buy the final call from them. I kind of admire people that believe in something enough to hand out leaflets. And I've done that. I've spent so many times selling communist newspapers and doing that. I respect them, right? I totally respect them. So when I'm out on the street, and I see someone leafleting or promoting what they believe, there's part of me, I might disagree with them, but part of me just kind of respects them just for doing it. So, one time I was in New York City, and on like every few blocks, I would see another person it would be a Korean person handing out leaflets like, come to our church, come to our church. So one of these Korean guys handed me a leaflet like, come to our church, and it's like Korean Christian community. And I said to him, I said, are you with Reverend Moon? And he looked at me. He said, that man is the Antichrist. I thought that was hilarious. Very funny experience. But yeah, and this guy, I talked to him some more. He was anti-communist, right? Not a communist, not a leftist, but he just hated Reverend Moon. There's a lot of anti-communists, Chinese folks who hate the Falun Gong. There's a lot of Iranian communists or Iranians in general who have mixed feelings or have confusion about the Islamic Republic, but they don't love the MEK. MEK is a counter gang. It's a group of fanatics, and it's very dangerous. So there you go. But yeah, no, and someone asked me about Nation of Islam and all that. I went to Iran with the Nation of Islam. I went to an amazing conference in Iran about Black Lives Matter and about the black question, the black national question in the United States. An amazing conference, and I got to spend a lot of time with leaders of the Nation of Islam, and I have admiration for them. Their beliefs are certainly not my own. The Nation of Islam's beliefs are very, very unique, and they're, and that's not my belief, but they're great people, and they love black people. They're fighting for the rights of black people. They're dedicated. They're really, really dedicated, and they're very anti-imperialist. They're very pro-Iran, very pro-China, very pro-Russia, very anti-imperialist. They're revolutionaries. I don't agree with a lot of things they've said, but that's okay. And then they don't even expect me to believe that because I'm a white guy, right? And they don't want to recruit me. They don't want me to be in their group because I'm a white guy, right? But they are a group of people who fought for their people, and I can respect that. And they're anti-imperialist. They know that imperialism is the main enemy of humanity, right? And I can respect that. And Minister Farrakhan is an amazing orator. His speaking ability is tremendous. I could listen to Farrakhan all day long. Farrakhan, that is amazing speaking. And, I defended Farrakhan, and they republished my tweets in Final Call. I was honored. I bought the Final Call, and there was my Twitter page republished. But, Farrakhan, they were going to do a documentary about Minister Farrakhan on Netflix, and they canceled it. And that wasn't right, right? And that when they've tried to ban him from social media, that's not right. I'm sorry, but, Minister Farrakhan, okay, he said things that I wouldn't agree with. But, this is a man who built the Million Man March. This is a man who's gotten so many people off of drugs with his drug rehab program. The Nation of Islam has done amazing stuff for the black community. At one point, they were allowing them to patrol the streets of Washington, D.C., and the crime rate significantly decreased. Have you ever considered setting up a private Facebook group so you can share ideas and whatnot? A private... I'm in all kinds of Facebook groups, so yeah, I don't know. I'm sure, yeah, many different Facebook groups have been created, so I don't know what that's about. But yeah, I have great admiration for the Nation of Islam. And Final Call is a great newspaper. I mean, they reprint articles from Press TV, they reprint articles from RT. They have great developments about Africa. The Nation of Islam is a great group in a lot of ways. I mean, and yeah, I know that someone mentioned Scientology. They do Scientology stuff now. I know they do Scientology. It's like part of their thing. Again, I'm not a Scientologist. I would not, encourage people to do Scientology, but if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the Nation of Islam is fascinating to me, and so is their history. Do you think Jesse Ventura could pull off a victory? I don't know. He's been very, very powerful. He's been very, very successful in electoral stuff before. It's a guy who's been in office. I mean, he was a governor for a while. He knows what he's doing. So, I mean, who knows? Could he? Maybe. I don't know. Very charismatic guy and very, very questioning of the system. But yeah, there you go. What else is on people's minds, folks? We can keep going for a little while longer here. I see people have stuff they want to talk about. I'm just answering chats and super chats right now. There you go. What else is new? What else is new, folks? We can talk about whatever you want to talk about. All right. North Korea, well, we're waiting to see. Aldous Huxley. Right. Well, that's interesting. I actually liked Brave New World. I read Brave New World in high school, and it's a very interesting book. But it's very anti-modernist, right? Anti-modernity. It's like people in the modern world, and it's interesting. The main character is this person who's like out on a Native American reservation. He comes out into the modern world, and in the modern world, everyone's drugged all the time, and is drugged. And so they're not really in touch with reality. And all the movies have just sex and violence, and all people are just kind of stupid and brainwashed in the modern world. And the native indigenous guy is an expert on Shakespeare, right? And he loves beauty and art, and he's seeing this world that's become fake where everyone's brainwashed. It's beautiful in a lot of ways. It's not Marxist, it's not progressive. And what's weird about it is in the Brave New World, the modern world, this kind of dystopia where everyone takes drugs all the time, so they're spacey and everyone's stupid and doesn't understand, doesn't have any really, really intellectual depth. It's this modern, it's modernity is what's being attacked. Aldous Huxley is attacking modernity. And it's this weird society where they worship Henry Ford, right? And the instead of the cross, everything's decorated with the T in honor of the Model T. But then every character has a communist name. Like there's a woman named Polly Trotsky. There's Bernard Marx, right? And they all have communist names. It's kind of fascinating, right? It's Brave New World. It's a sci-fi novel, and it's from the 30s. It's older, right? Most of the dystopian fiction is like 1984, Anthem by Ayn Rand. The dystopian explosion was in the 50s, but it was a little ahead of its time, and it's Aldous Huxley. And it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting book, and people being bred in incubators and all of that. And it's really, in a lot of ways, people point out that Aldous Huxley was in with the Rockefellers and the Fabians, and he was in with some of these really kind of elitist, social democratic, thinkers. And that in a lot of ways, he was writing about it kind of as a negative, but he was writing about some of the trends that people he associated with thought were very positive, right? Like eugenics, right? That breeding people like animals. The Rockefellers were all about that, brainwashing people, the drugs, right? Someone says I look good and I don't need a haircut. Well, I feel like I need a haircut, but thank you for telling me I look good, right? You made my day. I guess, when you have this much hair, you have to like brush your hair a lot more. Um, you know, but there you go. Huxley and Orwell were both anti-communist, and that is absolutely true. And Orwell, this new book has a big section on Orwell. I am going to kick George Orwell's ass in this book, so you're going to love the new book, Synthetic Left. Folks, I wish I could tell you where to order copies now. It's not ready, but I'm almost done with it. I've written the bulk of it. I'm going to do a rewrite. I do not like George Orwell, right? I liked him when I was a kid. I mean, he seemed like, it's effective propaganda, right? Because it appeals to that kind of dissident part of you, that part of you that doesn't feel like you fit in, that feels like the world is too conforming and authoritarian. I mean, there's an element of it. That's why it works. It's really, I do not like George Orwell, right? And this whole synthetic left that they have created, right? They've taken the negative tendencies of the revolutionary intelligentsia, and the CIA took them and amped them up, put them on steroids, and created this entity, the synthetic left, that is very dangerous. And I've written a book about it. And you are going to love this book because I'm almost done with it, and it needs to be written, right? And it's not a wild polemic, right? I'm not writing that all these people are revisionists. That's not the point. That's not the point at all. I'm writing about how the principles of leftism and even the principles of American progressivism, right, have been eroded, right? And that what calls itself left now is not left, right? That these people, this entity that walks around that is Malthusianism, that is opposed to historical progress, that wants just favors deconstruction at all costs, argues that there is no truth, this entity that's been synthetically created, that the world is in rebellion against, whether it's anti-imperialist rebellions, whether it's in the United States, the rise of the right, the alt-right in a lot of ways is an uprising against against the synthetic left. And there's things about the synthetic left that are that the alt-right and all of that is a response to the synthetic left having hegemony and putting out ideas that people don't like. It's complicated. I mean, they have polluted the political environment. What do I think of Tulsi Gabbard? And thank you for the other super chat. I appreciate it. What do you think of Tulsi Gabbard? What do you think of Tulsi Gabbard? Well, I've met her before, and she's very much committed to opposing regime change wars. She feels that they have negative outcomes. She's not a socialist. She's not a communist. And I think that a lot of people in the Pentagon agree with her. They agree with her. These regime change wars have negative outcomes. And if you're a Pentagon strategist, if you're living a normal life in the United States, you can be stupid, right? And a lot of people in the USA are stupid. Osama bin Laden was from Iran. No, he wasn't. No, Osama bin Laden. Well, Iran's a terrorist country, and Osama bin Laden was from there. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. Right? Iran is Shia. Osama bin Laden was from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was heavily involved in the 9/11 attacks. Saudi Arabia is a huge ally of the United States. So there you go. If you're a Pentagon strategist whose job it is to fight Al-Qaeda, you know who Al-Qaeda is. And wait a second, why are we trying to overthrow Assad? I thought we were fighting Al-Qaeda. And there's a lot of people in the Pentagon who are going, what the hell are we doing? They signed up to protect Americans and keep them safe from terrorism, not to carry out regime change operations that benefit the terrorists. And they're pissed about it. And I don't blame them. And if those people, people say that you should, oh, Tulsi Gabbard, she's no good in all these ways. I think the fact that a lot of people in the U.S. military and in the Pentagon are waking up, and I think Tulsi Gabbard represents those people. Someone asked me about Lukashenko. Yeah, Lukashenko and Russia are having a falling out right now. And this has happened before, right? Belarus is usually considered to be an ally of Russia, but they have a falling out. Right now they're having a falling out. And because of that, U.S. media is suddenly writing good things about him. They've been calling this guy the last Soviet dictator. They've been saying all kinds of nasty shit about Lukashenko for years. But because he's in this position where he's, had this falling out with Russia and he's getting friendly to the United States right now, it's kind of like with Mao in the 70s. All of a sudden, Rockefeller and, when Nixon went to China, all of a sudden American newspapers were saying good things about Mao. Why? Mao was, aligning with the United States against the Soviet Union and so right now they're saying good things about Lukashenko because he's aligned with the United States. And it shows how ridiculous our media is, right? I mean, until recently, anything you ever read about Lukashenko, anything, he was the last Soviet dictator, corrupt, murderer, communist, dictator, all this awful stuff. Well, now he's making nice with the United States. So Bloomberg News writes articles about, the positive effects of socialism in Belarus and stuff. I mean, it shows how our media is so controlled by the ruling class and their short-term strategic aims, right? Right? All of a sudden, U.S. media has discovered all the good things about Belarus under Lukashenko, right? I mean, his economic policies have been very beneficial. He's saved people in Belarus from the hard effects of capitalist restoration. And until recently, U.S. media would never admit that. Now they're hoping to use him because of his, whatever the disagreement with Russia is about. They're hoping to use him. They just want to use him. And so because of that, U.S. media suddenly we've discovered all these good things. U.S. media are shills. That's what you should learn from this. U.S. media are complete shills. Right? Just like David Rockefeller wrote this glowing article about Mao. I'll give it a decade. They're writing Mao was a mass murderer. I mean, they're shills. U.S. media are shills. They're complete shills. I remember, folks, that around Nepal, this is a great example. I remember this very vividly. Nepal, right? The Maoist rebels, they were terrorists. They were murderers. There's terrorism going on in Nepal. Terrorists, murderers, oh my God, Nepal is terrorist. It's awful. It's terrorist. Well, then I remember when the king stepped down and the new government came in, NPR and all of them were hoping that U.S. intelligence could get the Nepal Communist Party, the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist, to be their ally. So NPR all of a sudden did like a positive story, an interview, and for like 2 seconds, U.S. media pretended that they liked the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist for like 2 seconds. I remember this. And then, of course, it didn't work out. So now, oh, they're tied in with China, they're corrupt. It's the same old line, right? That occasionally, right, they'll find one of these regimes or governments or anti-imperialist forces that they can cooperate with. And and then there are people that are so pathetic. So pathetic. I'm sorry, but it's like, okay, the USA is trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela. Oh no, I can't defend them. Maduro's a dictator. The USA is trying to overthrow the government of Cuba. Oh, I can't defend them. Cuba, dictatorship. I can't do that, right? USA is trying to overthrow the government of Syria. Oh, Bashar, I can't do that. He's a dictator. Oh, but the USA is giving guns and weapons to the Kurds. Oh my God, Rahava, oh, shut up. These people can't even see how pathetic they are, right? I mean, they are just shills, right? It's like they can only like forces if NPR doesn't do a hit piece on them, if the New York Times doesn't do a hit piece on them. I mean, come on. I do an audiobook. Sure, I could do an audiobook. What are you suggesting, Tim, that I do an audiobook of? That's what I'm asking, right? But there you go. And that's my whole thing. It's my big existing critique of the left. It's like some people on the left can only like anti-imperialist governments if the New York Times gives them permission to. The New York Times is never going to give you permission to, okay? That's what these people don't understand, right? I swear, these people think that if real socialism ever happened, the New York Times would write articles about it, but they would say, we don't approve of socialism, but they haven't violated human rights. It's a legit government. Of course they're not going to do that. Do you think that the capitalists, it's these people, it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable, but it's not surprising. One of the sources I'm using for my new upcoming book is a book called The New York Intellectuals by Alan M. Wald. It's a very good book written by somebody. Alan M. Wald probably wants nothing to do with me politically, but it's a very good resource, and it documents these Trotskyites in New York City who were anti-Stalinist Marxists and how many of them became neocons, many of them became CIA shills. Fascinating. Read about it, right? The New York Intellectuals, Irving Kristol, right? The Congress for Cultural Freedom program that the CIA set up to distort and manipulate leftism. The guy who directed it was Irving Kristol, was a trot, and he went on to become a neocon, right? You can read about all of this, right? It's fascinating history, all documented, right? It's not a secret anymore, right? That these kinds of, well, I'm not like the bad kind. I'm a good socialist. Those kind of people are like the best friends imperialism ever had because it creates a cover. It creates a cover, right? It's like people that might be anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist. Well, they might join, they might become sympathizers with the Soviet Union. Don't worry, we've got Irving Kristol, right? And he'll give you CIA money to say you're against American capitalism and be really against the Soviet Union, right? It's about managing and manipulating dissent completely. But yeah, I'm getting fired up, but whatever. I guess I'll finish my orange juice. People just keep coming at me with super chats, so I'll keep talking. What the heck? It's not like I'm rushing to get somewhere else. What else is new, folks? Someone keeps asking me about Venezuela and oil prices. Venezuela is fighting for its life right now. Do you think Denmark-type hybrid of market economies that produce windmill companies at the same time have an excellent safety net? Well, the thing is that, that Denmark, Norway, Sweden, these are not socialist countries. These are social democratic countries. These are welfare states, and I'm for the social safety net. I'm absolutely for the social safety net they've created. I believe in that. I am for it. But at the same time, it's not socialism, and it's good that they are, they're windmills. They're promoting alternative energy. That's good. But again, windmills, we need to replace fossil fuels. Thoughts on Lopez Obrador in Mexico? He's done a lot of good things so far. COINTELPRO and leftist organizations. Well, let's talk about Obrador. He's done a lot of good things so far. I mean, it's not social. Mexico's not socialist, right? But it's a progressive government, right? They have a government that is not completely under the thumb of Western capitalism. They have a government that's aligned with unions. I think Lopez Obrador has done a lot of good in the time he's been in office. Now, he's done some bad things too, and I mean, it's not Venezuela. Mexico is not Venezuela. It's not heading that direction, right? But his administration has been a step forward, right? I mean, AMLO is doing good things in a lot of ways. There's still a lot of problems, right? He hasn't saved the world, and Mexico is not a socialist country by any means. But Lopez Obrador is the first good president of Mexico they've had in a long time, I think. I mean, it's the first administration that's actually fighting for Mexican people on some level, right? And I think it's great. And they stole the election from him before, and he's in office, and he's doing some good things. COINTELPRO. Well, COINTELPRO that's a specific program. Now, I know you're probably just referring to infiltration and manipulation, but COINTELPRO was a specific program launched by the FBI. It was called the Counterintelligence Program, and it basically argued that any Marxist or leftist activity in the United States was just the manipulation of the country by Soviet intelligence. First, they went after the Communist Party USA in the 50s, and they were very vicious to the Communist Party USA. But they also they started going after, the Black Panthers. As a consequence of COVID-19, monopolies will become larger. Will good prices go up? Yes, of course. Yeah, I'll address that too. But yeah, COINTELPRO, I mean, and the Black Panthers were viciously targeted. I mean, Black Panthers were killed as a result of their activities, inciting the United Slaves Organization, headed by Ron Karenga, the guy who invented Kwanzaa, to go after them. Fred Hampton murdered. It was an all-out war on the Black Liberation Movement, a war on the Communist Party, a war on Students for Democratic Society and the anti-Vietnam War movement. I mean, all kinds of people were targeted. I mean, the early gay rights movement was targeted. All kinds of people were just viciously targeted by COINTELPRO. It was a really nasty operation. And it was exposed. This group called the Citizens Committee to Investigate the FBI broke into the FBI's offices. And there's a little town in Pennsylvania called Media. It's like a suburb, and they broke into the FBI offices and stole their documents and handed them over to the media. It's kind of a famous incident, right? And this town was called Media, Pennsylvania. And COINTELPRO. And then, it all became public record. And I used to tell people this in college. I'd tell people, hey, the FBI sent Dr. Martin Luther King a letter urging him to kill himself. They spread rumors in U.S. media that Martin Luther King was gay. I tell people that and they'd go, yeah, right. Oh, where did you read that? But then it's true, And I think part of the Obama years, if I remember correctly, it was like the Bush years, they've been holding things down. But after Hurricane Katrina and after everything, they couldn't hold things in anymore. So they started, a lot of the Obama years was like, we're going to talk about bad stuff, but we're going to talk about it in our own way. Like during the Obama years, they made this movie about J. Edgar Hoover, where they showed J. Edgar Hoover threatening Martin Luther King. They showed COINTELPRO, but they showed it in this very watered down way. So it wasn't a systemic problem. It wasn't capitalism and the ruling class. It was one egotistical guy who had issues with his mom and looked a lot like Leonardo DiCaprio and was probably gay. And it was like they told the story of COINTELPRO in a way that wouldn't lead you to revolutionary conclusions. And there was a lot of that. It used to be people wouldn't believe COINTELPRO. And then when you convince them, they'd be like, wow, and they'd be sympathetic to communism. Well, now people kind of know it and they don't know it, right? And that happened a lot. Monopolies are getting big. I mean, they should nationalize Amazon right now. Absolutely, right? Amazon has such a monopoly at this point. They are making so much money. They're treating their workers like crap. They should be nationalized, right? I mean, it's a utility at this point, right? It should be nationalized, right? Amazon should be public property and should be operated to serve the public and not for profit right now. It should be made part of the Postal Service. They should expand the Postal Service to include Amazon. That's what I think should happen. And let me say this, if we had a government of action right now, if we had a real socialist government, they would immediately nationalize Amazon. They would immediately start building emergency hospitals. They bring soldiers home from around the world and put them to work serving community needs. They would hire the unemployed and put them to work building the infrastructure of this country. If we had a real government that actually was worthy of its name, that was actually governing and getting things done, a government of action, they would be handling this crisis completely differently. They would be completely, I mean, our government has fallen on its face. I started this live talking about Frankenstein, talking about neglect, how many people feel left behind and neglected. That's because we have capitalism. That's because we have a system where the government is just the shill of big corporations. It's just in it to serve the rich. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I have put that slogan everywhere. That is a slogan that should be painted on walls everywhere. We need a government of action. I'm done judging the government by what it says, by what they say. I am for a government of action, a government that gets things done, not a do-nothing government. Franklin Roosevelt used to talk about do nothing, see nothing, hear nothing government. We need a government of action to fight for working families, to take concrete, direct action to address the crisis. Children are hungry right now because there's not food in their stomachs. Action must be taken. Right? People don't have jobs, are worried about paying their bills. Action must be taken. We need a government of action to address the crisis, to serve the needs of the people. We absolutely need a government of action. We need a government of action to fight for working families and fight hard for working families. If we had a strong government in the United States, we had a government that actually did its job, that was worthy of the name. We didn't just have this bureaucratic institution that made profits for the rich, but a real government of action. Things would be very, very different. Very, very different. Right? And it must be said. And this is populism. Right? This isn't think for yourself, do for yourself, freedom, synthetic leftism. This is real working class populism, right? This is Eugene Debs. This is Gus Hall, right? This is the kind of policies they would have fought for. This is what the Black Panthers would have wanted. This is strength. We had a government that actually got things done and actually governed. Things would be very, very, very different right now. Oh boy, folks. Well, it's been fun. A lot of super chats, and I appreciate it. But hey, if you really want to help out, we need donations for the Center for Political Innovation. That's going to be the push. Coming out of this, we're going to make this conference happen. A lot of people are it's not going to be the good economy we once had, so it's going to be a little more difficult to pull off. But any help you can give to the Center for Political Innovation to get us off the ground and get us going is going to be very important. I've got a lot of great interviews coming up this week. I'm going to go on this Discord, blue Discord. I'm going to interview some anarchists. Done some great interviews. So stay tuned, folks. We're always doing great things on this channel, but we need you. I need you to help build this community. I need you to, get all your friends to start watching these lives and contributing and asking questions. I need you to build this community. The more of us there are, the better we are. We are a unique brand. You will not find this kind of leftism elsewhere. The Jacobin, the well-funded Jacobin operation is not going to promote what you're hearing here. I'll tell you that much. This is a unique brand. So I need you. You guys are what will make this happen, right? I don't have big Ford Foundation, CIA money, think tank foundation money to back up what I'm saying, right? I need you. I need a grassroots movement of the people to make this happen because we're all we got. We need to revive real leftism, real socialism. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need popular power. We need populism. Folks, I will end this live the way I always end my lives. Folks, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.